that the staff all survived the night of bowling. So we'll go ahead and get started. And as always, we have our director's report. And we start with Director George on the Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Let me start by thanking the Upper Arkansas Water Conservancy District for generously hosting the events on Tuesday. For those of us that were here in time, we could, I guess some went on a bike ride. Maybe someone else can tell how that goes. I didn't make it for that. But we had a nice event right out here. And for some of us been around a while, this is a very sacred place because you're sitting right where you can see the recreational in-channel diversion, which was probably nearly the most contested, hotly contested of the early RISD discussions. And it's beautiful, and it's been a great success for the community. So kind of fun to see that. It was nice to see everybody and some very, very fine presentations. So thanks to our friends in the Upper Arkansas for hosting us. Also, thanks to the community and who operates this facility. How nice is this? To save the historical center and make it a really fine part of the community. So thanks to them, and thanks to our caterer and everyone else here who has helped make this a nice time for all of us to have our meetings. Also want to welcome our two new directors. Thank you for standing up to be counted. It looks to me like after watching both of you here in the first meeting that you're going to fit right in. And that's great. So welcome to you both. And I think you'll find this will be a great experience too, as it has been for all of us. Let me talk a little bit about water conditions in the Colorado River Basin. We've already heard quite a bit, so there isn't much new that I can add. We know what's happening at Powell. The numbers that staff put in the director's report are hovering right around the 51% line. For mead, of course, is down, but we know that that's 40%. But it's Powell where we're watching, and it's sitting right at 52%. The worrisome part is that the forecasted flow into Powell is low. As of May 9, they were calling it 51%, but you don't have to do much besides stand beside the Colorado River and you can guess that number for the low and early runoff. It's pretty clear what's happening. And so I did a little research to see what the statistics are saying about all of this and trying to look forward a little bit. And I found a pretty good chart at the National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center website. And so the NOAA's 3-month outlook that they just made last week shows precipitation probability above normal. Now think about that. When have you heard above normal words other than temperature? Precipitation probability all through Utah, Arizona, western New Mexico, and western Colorado. They're claiming in the next 3 months we could be above normal on moisture. That's the first really positive forecast I've heard. Maybe I just searched till I found a good one. I don't know, because they're hard to find. Most of them have been below normal. That same report is, of course, predicting above normal temperature at that same time, and we all kind of see that. So the general situation is that we're dry, and talking about what to do about that. I think for my world of contacts of all the droughts I can remember through my adult life, this one has more general public awareness and is seeing more general population conversation about it than we've ever had before. And that tells me a couple things. One is that outreach is working, and the other is that this one really is as bad as we feel, and everybody knows it. So, of course, I couldn't leave this discussion without going to my main source of information, so that I always end my report, or at least the forecasting part, with the best information that is available to mankind, and that's the Old Farmer's Almanac. And happily, I found a current forecast, and the Almanac says we're going to be below, and this is for Western Colorado now, below normal precipitation until September. Then the Almanac says wet and cool for September. So if you can make it till then, and by then the Almanac will have changed, but that's okay. It doesn't change, okay. So let's talk about business in the area. On April 25th, as you all know, the 4 Western Slope Basin Roundtables met together in Grand Junction, and a number of us were able to be there. Good meeting, good discussion about a lot of things, but the main focus was what to do with the risk study phase 3. And there was a lot of discussion, and discussion was invited. It was intended, the meeting was intended to really get the audience of roundtable members, not just the leadership and not just us or the people working on the risk study itself, but the folks out on the ground to say, what do you really think? And if we were to do risk study phase 3, what should we do with it? What are the questions that we need to ask to develop the modeling formulas and run the models? And I think we really had hoped for a lot of input. We were always cautious to anticipate if there's a problem, if there's controversy, what are we going to do with it? And that earlier meetings of the 4 Basin Roundtables have had vigorous conversation, and I wouldn't say controversy, but a willingness to express opposing views among friends. And so we didn't know just where we would be, because the whole risk study is getting to a place where it's really getting pretty serious. The conversations were vigorous, but all in the kind of the same vein. There was very little quarreling, maybe none as I look back over it, and lots of consensus that, okay, this is good. We've supported phase 1, phase 2, and we support phase 3. It was hard to really pin down what the questions ought to be. And that's correct. I'm not surprised by that. Any conversation I've been in where we're trying to ask and answer the right questions, it's tricky, it's hard, and it's going to take us a lot more conversation to get the job done. And that was no different there. So the end result was that the 4 Basin Roundtables sitting together do want to see this go forward, and we'll continue to work on the questions. And the Colorado Basin Roundtable followed up on that and had their regular meeting last Monday. And that was well, actually, they were following up from the meeting a month ago, which is in between. It's a bi-monthly meeting. The in-between meeting, which was last month, which we call the Next Steps Committee. It's a little less formal, more conversation. They really bore down at that meeting on what these questions would look like. And that has helped those members who were at the 4 Basin meeting. And then it helped the conversation at the regular meeting on Monday. So I think that's probably just the way the other Basin Roundtables are doing it as well, as we can talk about. But there's a lot of interest in let's see what we can learn. and knowing that we have to ask the model the questions in order to get any meaningful answers. Other things that the Basin Roundtable talked about on Monday, they had an update from the River District on the status of Shoshone and what is happening with the Shoshone calls and flows. And I think they probably also talked about the discussions that are pending about what's the future of ownership and operation of Shoshone, which is a key issue for really not just the Western Slope, but the entire state. So let's see. Yesterday, I think Karen mentioned that the Colorado River Water Conservation District and Southwestern Water Conservation District were meeting yesterday. At the roundtable, we saw a memo from Andy Mueller, the general manager of the River District, setting the stage for this meeting. And I haven't gotten a report back from yesterday, so I don't know how the meeting went, but I know in anticipation what they were intending to do. And in Andy's memo, it reminded me that these two conservation districts have been meeting periodically together for several years now, I think since the mid-2000s. So there was this wasn't a unique gathering in that sense, that it was fairly common for them to do that. But he mentioned that one of the main things they wanted to do was to talk about phase 3 of the risk study and see what common ground there was between these two leaders, these two conservation districts. And my expectation is that both boards eagerly want to proceed. And I think they were going to talk about how do we expedite. And one of the ways they probably also talked about was, well, why don't we just put the money up and get started and not take as much time as it took, I think, for phase 2 to get everybody else on board from a donation standpoint, including us. So I'm guessing that was a positive conversation, that we'll get that moving ahead, and we can. I think we're expected to be a major player, not only to the extent we can fiscally, but from the esoteric side of things too. So I'll be anxious to hear the result of what those two boards were up to. And that may be it for me. Any questions for me? Let me just say, next time, our next meeting in July, you come to the main stem, Glenwood Springs. And one of the main features is that in that same week, we celebrate the 50th year anniversary of Rudeye Reservoir, I believe. Yep. And you should have already received an invitation. It's midday Tuesday, which maybe this was all planned, that we'd, of course it was, that will be our tour for this one. And then I'm sure Andrew's got us booked at a facility. Oh, I know. Are we doing the Mortgage Center? Or do you have us? Are we? Glenwood Springs has completed some really fine new construction, including the college and the city and the county have all partnered together to build a nice facility. And there's along with the offices for each of the partners is a community center area. It's called the Mortgage Center, primarily sponsored by the Mortgage family from Aspen. And it's new, and it's a more than suitable place for us to have our next meeting. So you'll enjoy that. And of course, it's Glenwood Springs, so plan some playtime. The bridge, of course, is completely finished. It's beautiful. It's functional. The whole area is really first rate. So plan to have some fun too for our next meeting. So questions for me?
Any questions for Director George? All right, thank you. Director George. Now we'll move on to the San Juan, San Miguel, Dolores River Basin. And on the phone, we have Director Hawkins.
Thank you, Chairman. All in exceptional or extreme drought right now. Our major rivers here are peaking in May. That's about a month early and well below average. And our forecasted runoff is in the 30 to 35% of average range. So this is going to be a really tough year where storage carryover is helping, but it's not necessarily preventing shortages. We're not expected to have enough water supply to get our irrigators through the season. And in the basins where there is not storage, the year is going to be particularly tough. This is highlighting the importance of storage and storage projects in the basin. There's one in the La Plata River Basin that our staff is currently working on with the Southwestern District. That's the Red Mesa Water Reservoir. And there has been some emergency planning grant money to try to deal with the state engineer's restriction on storage at that facility. Water suppliers and municipalities are considering drought restrictions and reduced irrigation return flows in some areas may be affecting domestic well supplies later this summer. So things are pretty grim here. The fire danger is pretty high. We have a countywide ban already on fires in La Plata County, and a lot of homeowners associations are doing fire mitigation projects this summer. So I think it's going to be a tough summer for us down in the Southwest. Turning to some of the events that have happened since the last board meeting, the Southwest Basin Roundtable held a meeting in April. That meeting included an update on the risk study and a discussion on funding limitations where the roundtable has set a limit on basin funding requests to $25,000 until the severance tax funding increases. Director George reported on the West Slope Roundtable meeting, and since I was not there, I don't have anything to add to that. We had a couple of other water events in April and May. The annual Southwestern seminar was well attended. There were nearly 200 people there. And I wanted to thank Directors Mitchell and Ryan, as well as Brent and Karen Kwan, for coming to speak. In early May, we held our annual Children's Water Festival, and more than 650 fifth graders attended. And it was interesting because it was the rainiest day of the spring when they held the Water Festival, so maybe we should hold more events like that. Recreation opened at Lake Nighthorse after careful consideration of cultural resource and municipal and industrial water supply concerns. That's been a long time coming, and there was a ceremony hosted by the tribes at the opening of the facility. I wanted to thank the in-stream flow staff for the work on Himes Creek. There was a report on that yesterday. There's been a number of meetings down here, and I just really appreciated the work with the Dolores Water Conservancy District and the Southwestern District to look for a resolution on that one. On a bit of a sad note, we lost two members of our local water community this spring. Steve Fern, who was a Southwestern board member and roundtable member and river protection work group member, and Water Congress board member, passed away suddenly this spring. It was a real shock to our community, and he was really one of the great water leaders and will be very, very missed. And Tom Miller, who worked for Bureau of Reclamation and the Southern Ute Tribe on the Animas La Plata project, also passed away, and I was deeply saddened to hear of that. I had worked with Tom for a number of years. And so to keep my director's report from being a total bummer at the end, I've included a picture of River Hawkins, and this is the reason that I'm not here today, but we will be there in July. So thank you, and I'll take any questions.
Beautiful picture. Any questions for Director Hawkins? All right. Thank you, Director Hawkins.
Thank you.
And now to the Gunnison River Basin, Director Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman Jan. I would like to thank everyone for the reception I've had here at my first meeting. My first impressions, pretty amazing group, and I salute the staff. The amount of work that they do to make this happen is nothing short of amazing. So thank everyone. Of course, the word in the Gunnison Basin is drought. The dark spots just continue to grow. The USDA has declared Montrose and Delta County essentially natural disaster areas. And the governor, as everyone knows, has followed suit there. Unfortunately, that's not going to make it rain. It's very real. Some of the cow-calf operations are in the process of downsizing their herd. I know of one family that's looking to take their pairs to Kremlin for the summer. Found some expensive pasture. I guess that might be better than eating your seed by selling your livelihood there. My project is fine. We went into the season with full reservoir storage. We're in a unique situation with our primary storage is at Taylor, but we have transfer rights to the Aspinall unit. So we're going to make it. The Uncompahgre is very tight. To place a call on the Uncompahgre for the water users, I call out one of my directors. So I take that pretty seriously. As bad as things are, for us, and they're not horrible, we're going to make it. The folks in the North Fork are really in trouble. Grand Mesa snowpack was the lowest ever recorded. The area has a lot of orchards, and following an orchard, I can assure you, doesn't work. So my thoughts are with them too. To change the subject, I attended the Gunnison Basin Roundtable meeting Monday of this week. And of course, the big topic of conversation was phase 3 of the risk study. I was happy to see that their ideas of what the questions ought to be are technical modeling questions, and to leave out the social economic impacts, at least at this point in time, I think is a step forward. there is 100% consensus in that basin that we need to continue this analysis. And I have not heard anything either about the joint meeting of the two conservation districts. The other topic at the round table of importance was talk of updating the basin implementation plan, and hopefully we can get started with that process. I thought I might share some history. The Uncompahgre project that I managed was one of the first 5 projects. It included the Milk River project, was also one of the first 5. It's on the high line of Montana. My mother's family homesteaded up there, so I got some connection with it. The Newlands project in Nevada takes the water from Lake Tahoe and uses it to farm in Fallon, Nevada. In my previous career, I managed a gold mine outside of Fallon, Nevada. It also happens to be on Highway 50. I spent most of my life on Highway 50. Of course, also one of the first 5 was the North Platte project there in the Nebraska, Wyoming. I don't have any real connections to that, but I have fished on Pathfinder Dam and Reservoir. And of course, the other one is the Salt River project, and I think everybody's probably seen the picture of Teddy Roosevelt's dam with the rock face on it. And as a child, I suffered from hay fever. So my parents would farm me out with an aunt and uncle that lived in Mesa. And they were just grown-up kids, basically, but they had a speedboat, and so we'd always spend the weekends on Lake Roosevelt. So with that, I'd entertain any questions.
Questions for Director Anderson? All right, we'll move on. Director Trick with the North Platte.
Chairman, I'd like to start off with 2 thank yous. The first is to our generous hosts here at this great facility. I always like to come to Salida, and this is a great place for a meeting, and we're right here next to the river, and it's been a good meeting. So I'd like to thank them for hosting us. And the second is to thank the directors and the staff and everybody that has given me such a warm welcome. You guys are a great group of people and doing great work, and I'm excited to join you. And I would also like to thank everyone that supported and nominated me for this position, including the water users in the North Platte. I know I have big shoes to fill with Ty Wattenberg, and I hope that I can represent the water users in that basin to the fullest extent. And just like to show my appreciation to everybody, staff, the board, for your warm welcome. And for Director Hawkins, I look forward to meeting you since we have not yet met. So moving on to some basin news. As you can tell from the slide that was up for Director Anderson, the North Platte is one of the few areas that is not in the drought area on that map. We were fortunate. I think we topped out at 105% on April 15th. And I checked yesterday and we were around 47%. So we're not we're not in as bad of a situation as some of the other basins. Some of that expensive pasture that Director Anderson was talking about, we've been trying to provide. We've been getting a lot of calls from people in the Southwest for searching for pasture. And so I know that a few people have secured some, but hopefully everyone that needed to find some in our basin was able to. Otherwise, it's branding and irrigating season. We did have, late runoff coming off. And when it did come off, it took a long time to get where it was going because we had low to zero snow cover in the basin over the winter. And so whatever water has come off for runoff in this spring has just soaked into the ground, and it's taken a long time to get to where it needs to go. And as you all know, we're strictly flood irrigation up in that area. So, but we did have a call on the Michigan. The first call went on about 10 days ago, but that call lasted about a week, and now there's currently no call on the river and the basin. So we also have a new water commissioner in the basin. So I'm sure he's full swing into his learning curve and getting to face-to-face meet a lot of the water users in the basin for the first time. So that's always a learning curve for them and also for the water users. We did have a meeting with the state engineer sitting to my right in April. And I was not present at the meeting, but I heard that they gave him a good tour and had a good meeting. So that was a positive thing. And on to roundtable news. The roundtable did meet on Tuesday, and they approved a new project for the Water Supply Reserve Fund for the Spicer Ranch project, which is called the Kuwait Reservoir Outlet Repair Project. So they're excited about that, having more projects come through. And also in that vein, I think the focus right now is outreach for the roundtable, just to make people, again, and reiterate and make people more aware that there are funds available for projects and getting people to come to the roundtable with projects, because it seems that has been a challenge. So in that vein, they are organizing an event on June 7th from 6:30 to 8:30 at the River Rock Cafe, which you all have visited. I think some of you got the pleasure at your September meeting last year. But the focus of that will be outreach to the next generation of water leaders in the basin. And as you know, or may not know, we have a challenge in that area with talent drain. So, a lot of people that grow up there either leave or have to leave. And it's becoming an issue because the next generation of community leaders, water leaders, county commissioners in our area, it's few and far between to find people to serve for those positions. And it's just a function of the economic status of our basin right now. So we're doing our best. We're trying to reach out to a lot of the younger folks that are there, a lot of the younger water users that may not know about the roundtable or may not be involved yet. So that's the focus of this event, is to just reach out to those people, give them some information, educate them about the roundtable, educate them about the reserve account funds that are available for projects. I think that also a couple of local businesses will be highlighted. There are some outfitters, some fishing guiding companies that do quite well in our area, actually, and they're going to speak to the economic benefits for them on the recreation side and the non-consumptive side. So hopefully they will be able to attend. They do a lot of work, right now with touring and guiding. So hopefully they can get one of their guides to take a quick break and come talk to people in the basin at the meeting, just to highlight their success in that area in our basin. And also they plan on, doing a survey kind of to just capture some information from the people that do attend on what their concerns are, their, I guess, sort of awareness level of water issues that happen in the basin. So if anybody is around or happens to be in that area on the 7th, feel free to stop by the meeting, and I'm sure they will give you a warm welcome. So I think that's about all that I have, and I'll take any questions.
Right. Thank you, Director Trick. Any questions? All right, we'll move on. I guess it's my turn. So on the South Platte Basin, and I would like to thank the Upper Ark too. It was a really nice reception, and thanks to Director Goebel for having us here in your basin. It's a beautiful place to be. I also want to thank Chelsea Nutter, who led us around on our bike ride tour. That was fun. It was a little easier bike ride than the one I went on yesterday. And so, and I want to thank Jen Melee and Lauren Riss and Jonathan Hernandez for keeping me on the easy paths and not making me go with the other group up the rusty lung, because I don't think I would be here today. So it's been fun up here, and so anyway, it just, when I was driving here, I took kind of a different path than going through Denver, because I try to go around Denver when I can. So I headed south at Brush on Highway 71, and so you get to drive along the mountains from a distance for a while, and then I head over through a lot of small towns, through Lyman and Simla and Peyton into Colorado Springs, and then through Colorado Springs down to Penrose and Canyon City. So it was just a really nice drive, and it just reminded me of the beauty of our state and why so many people want to move here. So, and how important that makes our job as water leaders in the state. So that's just what struck me as I was driving. And I have a little more upbeat message, because as Director Trick said, we're in the northern part of the state, and especially the Northeast. It's been pretty good for us. So I'm almost feeling a little bit guilty after hearing all the stories of drought, which is definitely a problem. But as you can see from our snowpack graph there that Andrew put up for me, the bottom line there is we're below average all the way, but we weren't bad. So, we got up to close to 95%, and it started coming out at the usual time towards the end of April, first part of May, and it's kind of paralleling the average graph. So it's not terrible, and we're getting a little snow coming down through the river just because of rain events. And Andrew, if you want to move forward, I just there it is. So here's the river flows at Kersey, and this is where the last main rivers come into the South Platte. So the Cache La Poudre comes in just above Kersey, and so that's one of the areas that we watch. So you can see back on the first part of May, there was a big rain event in Denver, and so that helps everyone downstream. And so you can see it peaked at Kersey at a little over 3,000, and then it started dropping off. Then towards the middle of May, we began to get a little bit of snow melt and got a few more rains. And then towards the end, just last weekend, we got another rain, and that was mainly on the eastern plains. And so Kersey came up not as high, but a little bit. And if you want to go to the next, this is Julesburg. So in between Kersey, and you met Larry Frame from down by Julesburg yesterday. And so you can see we captured almost everything until this last storm event. And that was because it was mainly on the eastern plains, and the demand isn't there anymore because we got pretty good rains. So you can see there's little blips in the first part of May, but for the most part, we captured everything in our reservoirs, or we were irrigating, because around the Fort Morgan area, it was still pretty dry, and up around Greeley until recently. So if you want to go to the next Oh, I just thought I'd throw a few pictures in because this isn't the way it always is. But I asked my wife to take a couple pictures out. So she stepped out the front door and took a picture of our pasture to the north. So you can see the grass is fairly green at this time of year. And then she took a picture to the south off our deck. And that's the North Sterling Outlet Canal, which on the 4th of July every year, we have what we call the Freedom Float. So if any of you are interested, we had 67 participants last year. The North Sterling Outlet runs about 3.5 miles through our property. So at that time, off our deck, you would see people floating down the ditch. So it's a fun time. But I just wanted to show, we did have good rains. If you want to go to the next slide. Oh, we missed one. But I was going to show the slide of the rainfall events. And we've had about 4.3 inches of rain in Sterling, and average for May is about 2.3. So we're about double of what we've had. And so it's been a good situation in Sterling overall. And, Celine, our Director Hawkins talked about the importance of storage in a dry year. But as you can see, we're letting water going out of Julesburg, and there's importance to have storage in a wet year too. And that's to use it in a dry year. So whether it's wet or dry, storage is important, and all of our storage reservoirs are full. So we're in pretty good shape on the South Platte. Switching gears a little bit, we at our last two roundtable meetings, both Metro and South Platte, we talked about what John Stolp had on yesterday about the South Platte Regional Opportunities Working Group, or SPROG, as we fondly call it. Anyway, it started by, I just thought I'd give a little bit of history because we're kind of going out and doing a few meetings to get other people interested. But it was a few of the executive members of the roundtables that were pulled together by Doug Robotham, who at that time was the Nature Conservancy representative on the South Platte Basin Roundtable. And we just finished our basin implementation plan, and he thought, it'd be nice just to get a few people together and see if we could brainstorm something that could help the South Platte Basin and help us, what we call, get our house in order. So that's what started with SPROG. And we got, he asked a few people to participate, and it was Mark Waggy with Denver Water, Joe Stibrich with Aurora Water, Eric Hecox with South Metro, Sean Cronin with the St. Vrain and Left Hand Water Conservancy District, Eric Wilkinson with the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, Joe Frank with the Lower South Platte Water Conservancy District, and myself, just to come in, take off our hats, and just brainstorm. So that's kind of the history, and it started about in 2015, and we just met off and on when we could. And actually, some of the entities, when we found out that we were probably going to need some engineering done, they contributed money, and we funded about $200,000 worth of engineering to look at opportunities on the South Platte River. So this is what we rolled out to the roundtables to try to get interest, to see if they thought it was worth going forward or not. And so it was kind of a 3-storage and maybe a 4-storage concept, but one near the Front Range. These are just triangles, and don't get worried about the size of the triangles or anything like that, but this is just a concept. So what we were looking at is ways to use free river water, like now, ways to use reuse water, ways to use agricultural water through leases, alternative transfer methods. So all of those being put together and stored in various facilities in strategic location. And it actually dovetails with the South Platte storage study, which we all heard about a couple meetings ago. We also gave this presentation, Lisa Darling, who is now at South Metro, and I gave it to the IBCC on May 2nd. But we looked at 2 demand centers, one on the Northern Front Range and one in the Denver metro area. We also looked at 3 major storage facilities, one at Kersey after the confluence of the Cache La Poudre, and one on the Front Range. You always need storage whenever you're looking at using an agricultural water right, because agricultural water rights are summertime water rights predominantly. So you need a place to put those so the municipalities can use them over the course of the year. And we looked at potentially exchanging that water or piping that water. And so that's just the idea. And we did a lot of engineering behind it with Wilson Water helped us with that as well. If you want to go to the next slide. And so we looked at a single storage concept facility, and then we looked at 3 storage concept facility. And you get a lot more bang for your buck when you put the storage facilities in certain locations, and you're able to, what we looked at is we were just trying to hit a target of 50,000 acre feet of firm yield. And we did that. And we didn't use any of the Denver Basin tributary wells, which we would use for drought recovery. But with the 3 storage concept, we didn't even have to use those. So it makes sense, and we're moving forward, and we'll probably come to the roundtables at some point and ask for some funding to continue on. It would be kind of an extension of the South Platte storage study and this study moving forward to see what we can do on the South Platte River to fully utilize what we have on the South Platte River. Really, the only way that you can fully utilize everything is an on-stream reservoir, and that's just pretty hard to get permitted these days. So we're looking at off-channel reservoirs, and there's still going to be times where we have to let water slide by because it's coming too fast. So I believe that's my last slide. And the only other thing I thought is, if you're interested, there's going to be the Colorado Ag Water Alliance is having a tour of the South Platte up in our area on July 12th. And so I think it's like $35 to come along on the bus ride. And we're going to be looking at recharge and storage facilities, direct ditch diversions. And we hope to have a lot of people in attendance so they can learn about water in Northeast Colorado. So that ends my report. If you have any questions of me. All right. Thank you. We'll move on to the Arkansas River, Director Goebel.
Mr. Chairman, and you'll have to explain that term free river to us here in the Arkansas. I'm not sure we're familiar with that, but I enjoyed your pictures. I think if I could squint when you took the picture to the south, I could see some brown right on the horizon. So that would have been right around I-70.
Yeah, that's right.
So anyway, I'd like to thank everybody for coming to the Arkansas. We're very proud of our basin, and even though I think most of you have a shorter trip than me, even though I live in the basin, so we're pretty stretched out, but we appreciate it. I'd also like to thank the Upper Ark District Board and staff, and also the Ark Basin PEPO group for the fun tour and very nice reception on Tuesday. I'd also like to welcome Directors Anderson and Trick to the board. I've enjoyed meeting you and looking forward to serve with each of you. I'd also like to thank former directors McLeod and Wattenberg. I'd been waiting to thank them, but now that they're actually not here, I guess I'll thank them for their dedicated service to not only their basins, but the state of Colorado for many years. And I really appreciated our short time serving together, and they were both very welcoming and helpful to me as a new board member. So I'm truly grateful for that. Also like to, again, thank our Division II engineer, Steve Whitty, for all of his years of service to the Arkansas Basin and the state of Colorado, and his leadership and vast knowledge of all things water will be greatly missed. But I do wish him well in his soon retirement. And last but not least, on the thank yous, I'd also like to thank Executive Director Mitchell and the whole staff for their continued great work in carrying out the CWCB's mission. I'm always impressed by what all happens between the 2 months that we meet. So very thankful to all of you, and again, well wishes to Jeff Basler in his retirement. So the Arkansas Basin Roundtable held their April meeting in La Junta in conjunction with the Arkansas Basin River Water Forum. And that's an annual event which many staff attended. And it was well attended in general, and very nicely done. The Roundtable heard a very good presentation from Brent Newman and Lane Leoniak on past and current Colorado River conditions and the efforts being made on the drought contingency planning. And so we appreciated that. There was a lot of new roundtable members that learned a lot that day, and a lot of existing ones that did too. So we appreciate that. The roundtable also met last week in Pueblo, where we heard a presentation on the current drought conditions from Tony Anderson from the National Weather Service. And if you can advance a slide. Oh yeah, thank you. I was curious to see where we were this time last year, just to, I guess, make it hurt a little bit more. So I got a side-by-side slide here of almost exactly a year ago. And so you can see that the state as a whole only had about 6% that was even in the dry category. And now we're looking at almost 80% dry and or drought, and 65% of that is in some sort of state of drought. So it's crazy what a difference a year can make. And then looking at the May 1st snowtail data, you can see quite the difference from last year. Definitely the southern part of the state's hurting, as we've heard. I don't know if it's possible to move I-70 south, but maybe that would help. Also wanted, just because the last couple of meetings I've talked about a couple of our major reservoirs, and even though we are in a drought, we're very fortunate to have the storage we do have. And so Pueblo Reservoir is currently storing just over 234,000 acre feet, which is 4% less than this time last year and 125% of average. And as you can see on this graph, we nearly missed a spill in mid-April by only about 3,000 acre feet. So if we would have hit that orange line there, we would have spilled to the river. So we avoided that thanks in large part to a coordinated effort between all storage participants, making sacrifices to either limit transfers in or move water out. And so that was very much appreciated. John Martin Reservoir, another one of our big reservoirs further downstream, is currently storing around 273,000 acre feet, which is 112% above what it had, or 112% of what it had this time last year, and 206% of average. So higher than it is in typical years. So we're very fortunate for that. And it came within about 13,000 acre feet, or about 2 vertical feet on the staff gauge from spilling. And has released about 45,000 acre feet in the last 2 months because of all the dry conditions downstream and all the thirsty irrigators. So I'm sure we'll see that drop quite a bit unless we see some runoff of any substance and or any rain. And the last thing I wanted to mention was that the documentary that the folks that were at the reception on Tuesday saw, which is titled "The Arkansas River Leadville to Lamar," will air May 31st on Rocky Mountain PBS at 8 p.m. So everyone make sure to get their VCRs all set up to record that. So with any, I guess with that, that will complete my report.
Thanks, Director Goebel. Any questions for Director Goebel? You have a question?
Director Goebel, are you in the documentary?
No, I actually avoided it, but there is some drone footage that I took is in there. So yeah, I answered a lot of questions, but somehow they didn't hit record. So I lucked out there.
I mean, I think that's going to influence my decision to hit record.
Will it help or hurt?
You did see Kevin Reedy was in there, right?
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? All right. The City and County of Denver, Director Wells.
Yes. So I'll start with our water watch report. Sorry, it's really 2 slides on the page. Oh,
It's 2 slides on a page, so you won't be able to see it quite as well. The first graph is storage in all our various reservoirs. And the bottom line is that historic median is 85% at this time of year, and this year we're at 94. So above historic median. Part of that is because we entered the year fairly full, and part of that is earlier runoff. And the reservoirs, our West Slope reservoirs, Dillon and Meadow Creek, are above normal for this time of year. Cheeseman and Cheeseman and Marston, which are South Platte, one's in town and Cheeseman's upstream a little bit, they're lower than normal for this time of year. So, and then the daily use, the blue line is the average post 2002 drought. So it's actually 2012, so even post that drought. And we're holding to where we should be. You can tell when it got warm. And it spikes up a little, but this is average, so you expect it to be above and below. This is supply reservoir contents for us. The 3 little lines are predictions. So the lowest red dot is if we have a dry year, and then green is if we have a normal year, and the top one is if we have a wet year. And based on the recent precipitation and inflow and stuff, it looks pretty certain that we'll fill, and we're above historic median going in and coming out. So that's a good thing. This is precipitation. As you can see, in general, May was good in certain locations, not so much up in the South Park. And, it's not bad. And some of it's been, exceptional. The upper slide is South Platte precipitation, and lower is Colorado. And these are our watersheds. So it's the Blue and the Fraser in the Colorado, and then the upper South Platte. And the South Platte has bumped along just a little bit below normal, but not bad. And the Colorado's bumped along and managed to get up to over 100% of normal. This is the snowpack. And as you can see, South Platte, went earlier and steeper, and the Colorado in those 2 basins is, again, bumping along right about normal. The top thing is that's the NCRS stream flow around our reservoirs. The 3 on the left are the Colorado River Basin, and they're all green, right near 100%, a little bit over. The others to the right, so starting with the yellow one there, is Gross Reservoir, which is in Boulder County. Antero is orange, 51% of normal. That's South Park. 11 miles, 75%. Move down the river to Cheeseman, 52. And Strontia Springs, which is at the confluence of the north and of the main stem and the North Fork, 64%. So the South Platte is stream flow. It's had its snow and it's doing okay, and the reservoirs are full. But if we were relying on natural precipitation, which of course we can't do, we wouldn't be in good shape. And then this is inflow to Cheeseman in the middle, and then Dillon at the top. And as you can see, Dillon is clearly the snow, the runoff is natural inflow is coming in earlier than normal. And then this is a slide we do every time for the new board members. The green is a precipitation event. The blue line is water demand, and the orange is daily temperature. So I always find it amazing that people just don't use water when it rains in the summer. So you see coming through the winter, and for whatever, they're able to figure it out and not irrigate when there's precipitation. That's the last one I'm going to show. Okay, well, I got so excited because my slides were up that I forgot the introduction to my remarks. So sorry about that. I, too, want to welcome Directors Anderson and Trick. It's fun to have you aboard. If we continue to bowl, however, Director Anderson is going to have to pick up a ball. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. And being here in Salida is terrific. Thank you, Director Goebel. We were lucky enough to convene at two great public facilities. On Tuesday, it was the Scout Hut in the park, if you weren't there, and it just reopened May 1st after renovations. It's a lovely facility. And this place, the steam plant, is terrific. I did want to tell you, I learned yesterday about the art around the room. They're having an art show, community art show. There were, I think, 45 local artists. All these are local artists, and people who came to the opening night reception got ballots. And so they're the first place and the fifth place are they're over on that wall, and they're around the building elsewhere, and you can see. And these are accomplished local artists. So that'll, when you're getting your food, you can also look around at the artwork. So next, I want to talk about a water quality issue that Denver Water is unfortunately involved in. This has to do with the lead and copper rule. Under the lead and copper rule, if you have are likely to have lead service lines in your service area, you have to do testing every 6 months, and you sample homes. It's a very unusual process. The testing is done by homeowners, and you have to do 3 draws, and you run the water, and then you take the sample, and you pop it up, and you send it in, and it gets tested. And so it's just unusual to rely on the compliance of a whole bunch of homeowners. And the way that the process works is if at the 90th percentile, as long as the 90th percentile of those samples stays below the action level of 15 parts per billion, you're fine. In 2012, the 90th percentile was at 17 parts per billion. So 2 parts per billion over, and that's an exceedance. And out of that, we sent 250,000 notices of lead. There might be lead in your water, and we did a lot of things. And we did a corrosion control study, which is mandated by the law. For the corrosion control study, it took a long time because we had to harvest service lines from people's yards and do studies, running water through and testing corrosion control methods, primarily increasing the pH and putting orthophosphate in the water, which coats the, both of them produce a scale in the pipes. And we tested those at Moffett Treatment Plant, which gets its water from the Fraser. So that's a different chemistry completely, really, than our other water. Then they did Marston Treatment Plant, which is the one that's in town, and it gets its water from Dillon and from the South Platte. So did those studies, wrote a report. The report said orthophosphate is a little more effective, 2 parts per billion or so, maybe 4, in its effectiveness. But orthophosphate is phosphorus. And when you put it in potable water in our system, which has 1.4 million people and 330,000 service lines and 330,000 properties, most of which irrigate, you put phosphorus into the environment directly through irrigation and indirectly through, because it goes through the wastewater treatment plants, which have to treat it, and then it goes, and it's going to go all over the system. So putting phosphorus in what I call a phosphorus challenged environment like the South Platte is a problem. 3 of the reservoirs that will be impacted by this addition of phosphorus, Cherry Creek, Chatfield, and Barr, Milton, are 1 state parks. 2, they are already under phosphorus control regulations and having a very difficult time complying because it's hard to get phosphorus out of the water. the wastewater treatment plants that would be affected, Metro, Bi-City, Broomfield, South Adams County. Not quite sure who all they are. They, of course, will have to deal with the phosphorus. So we recommended pH. The Water Quality Control Division rejected our proposal and ordered us to put orthophosphate in the water and to have it completed within 24 months, which requires infrastructure to be constructed at each of our treatment plants, beginning now. And so we are working to try to see if we can figure out a way not to have to do that, because it's a very serious and frankly irreparable harm to the environment. But the Safe Drinking Water Act is the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the Clean Water Act is a different statute. So we filed an administrative appeal, which was denied, that there is no right to an appeal. And also, Metro Wastewater Reclamation District, the City of Aurora, and Greenway Foundation filed a Administrative Procedure Act type review in district court. And so once Denver Water's appeal was denied, we moved to intervene in that lawsuit. And we think that that will go forward. So we're in this legal thing of trying to figure out what avenues we might have. What we want to do is to give a year's pause, not make us start down the orthophosphate path just yet, and to do more study. We did this closed loop study. It was technically correct. It did what it was supposed to do. What it didn't do was look at how does it work in real life. We have 3,000 miles of mains, 330,000 service lines. They don't all behave the same. We have completely different water chemistry between the two sources of water. And it's possible that with that much water in that many places, with that many service lines, we believe we have 60,000 lead service lines in our service area. They're all in the older parts of Denver. It's 1950 and earlier homes. After 1950, lead just disappeared. So we figure we can figure out where the problem is, and maybe we should try to deal with it that way. So we've engaged a consultant, what I call the watershed entities. In addition to those who sued, it includes Chatfield Watershed Basin Authority, Bar Milton Watershed Authority, South Adams County Water and Sanitation District, some others. Anyway, the watershed entities are also engaging the consultant to do more study as to what the impacts of orthophosphate might be, and to focus really also on public health issues. Algae blooms in reservoirs are not good. Cherry Creek has had to close a couple of times because of cyanotoxin, which is created by certain algae. So it's a big honking issue. And we're hoping to be able to get somewhere and to get into a position where everybody's working for the same goal, which is to deal with lead reasonably and not do harm. So that's where we are. And it's taken a lot of time, but I think we'll get there. I have faith. And now for something more pleasant, we have some activities that have occurred as a result of the Colorado River Cooperative Agreement. And one is kind of monumental in the water world, is that the Blue River Decree which we agreed to how to amend it and how it should be interpreted. And that was a big reason for the CRCA being entered into. The judge finally signed the uncontested decree, which he had for a year and a half. And what that does is trigger a number of obligations of Denver Waters. One is, had this been a drought year, we would not be able to reduce our bypass flows below Dillon in a drought. We gave up that right, but we didn't have to anyway. But most importantly, I guess, for Summit County, $4.5 million will be paid to most of the towns and entities in Summit County in the first quarter of next year for various water quality and environmental projects. And next time I will bring a list of what all those are. So that's quite a bit of money, and the Blue River Decree is a long time coming. It's been disputed since 1955 when it was entered, and so that's really great news. The second thing is in the other part of where the CRCA was important, and that is in the Fraser in Grand County. We just did a project. Well, let me back up. The CRCA created a group called Learning by Doing, which is comprised of Denver Water, Grand County, the River District, Trout Unlimited, Northern, CPW is on the management committee of Learning by Doing. What Learning by Doing gets is all the money that Denver Water agreed to give to Grand County and the CRCA for various things. Those environmental things will all be funneled through Learning by Doing. The Forest Service and the Corps of Engineers recognized Learning by Doing in their permitting process for Gross Reservoir. And so some of the permit requirements that Denver Water will have to meet, which stream what money goes to, that's going to go through Learning by Doing. So we just, Learning by Doing just completed its first project. It's called Fraser Flats Project. It was restoration of almost a mile of the Fraser River. It's part of the property is owned by Devil's Thumb, so that'll tell you where the project is. The other part of the property is owned by Grand County Water and Sanitation District. Denver Water contributed $50,000 for the $200,000 project. That $50,000 is sort of advance payment for one of the funds that's in the CRCA. All that money doesn't get paid until we have all our permits, but this was an advance payment. It was just open to the public about 2 weeks ago. 4/10 of a mile, the part of the project that's located on Grand County property is now open to the public for fishing access. And it has not before been open to the public. And they have they're seeing 4 times more fish in that stretch of the river than they did before the improvements and channel improvements were made. So it's not a lot of money, a whole lot of effort. I don't know how many volunteers showed up one weekend and planted 2,000 willows. So it's an example of what you can do if you put your mind to it. So go visit just upstream, I think, of Devil's Thumb. And that's my report. Do I have any questions?
All right. Director Gallagher.
I'm very disturbed to hear about your problems with the orthophosphate mitigation issue or solution. And are you aware of if this is taking place elsewhere in the country in other municipalities?
Some it is. So from what I understand, EPA's Office of Research and Development just decided that, orthophosphate was the thing to do. Orthophosphate is not a problem so much where there's a lot of water to dilute whatever it is. It's not as big a problem if you don't irrigate with potable water, which, only dry places do that. So it's not so much of a problem. And most entities, if they can, they'll do pH. The thing about orthophosphate, by the way, is once you start putting it in, you can never stop because the scale gets there, and if you change it, the scale comes off along with all the lead it ever trapped. And so it's kind of an irrevocable decision. So it is a big issue. Flint just scared the Jesus out of everybody. And so sometimes common sense gets lost in the shuffle. So, but yeah, Well, and actually, there are a whole bunch of communities around here. Once we put orthophosphate in our water, Broomfield will probably have to put it in its water because they get some potable water from us. And then all the entities in Wise may have to do it. And it just kind of snowballs from there.
Thank you.
Director Dutton. Director Dutton.
Director Wells, in the studies and the cost benefit analysis, was a physical solution looked at? Meaning, what about just replacing all of the pipes?
Yes, it was. There was no cost benefit analysis. That's really, kind of the problem, that it doesn't call, statute doesn't call for that. Removing lead service lines is we are doing that. We're doing about 1,000 a year. And we have a nationally recognized program, but it's very, it's just going to take a lot of time. It is our goal, and we have pledged to remove all the lead service lines. But it's difficult to do it. It sounds simpler than it is. But the problem with lead service line replacement is you have to dig up the street for every one, because you have to start at the main and replace the line, and then you hit the meter, and then you have to go into the house and do a little plumbing. So a crew of 4 or 6 can do 2 a day. It's just not fast, but absolutely that is the solution. It is a little long term. One of the things that we're looking at now is whether we can't just identify the lead service lines and give people filters and give them instructions on how to, if you flush and you have a filter, you'll be safe. So that's another thing that we're looking at and hoping that we can say just exactly that. Why don't we go to where the problem is instead of, So yes, it has, but it's not part of the decision.
Right. Any other questions? Thank you, Director Wells. Now we go to the Rio Grande. Director Dutton.
Thank you. And thank you to our hosts. Thank you for the wonderful bike tour and the wonderful reception. I especially enjoyed the presentations, and it was really exciting to see some of the neat partnerships and the cool stuff that they're working on Monarch Pass. That was really inspiring and exciting. Welcome to the new directors. It's awesome to have you on board, and it's kind of cool that Director Goebel and Hawkins and I are no longer the new kids. So, so for selfish reasons, I'm excited, but also very excited to get to know you and to have you representing your areas. Thank you to the staff for putting together this great meeting and for all your work. It's not lost, I think, on any of us how hard you all work on your memos and your presentations. So thank you. All right, let's get to it. So the Rio Grande, we were fortunate to have Director Ryan come visit a couple weeks ago. It was a very nice time. We were pleased to show Director Ryan, some of the projects that have been recently completed and other projects that have been standing for quite some time, and show you around. And I think people really appreciated the opportunity to visit with you in person. And a comment was made that by one of our farmers that he was really pleased that Director Ryan would come down to the Valley, and not just if we want to meet with him that we have to go to Denver. And I think that sentiment was felt throughout the Valley. So thank you for taking the time and for coming, and you're welcome anytime. I don't think I need to belabor drought because the pictures have been up there, and you saw that we are totally red and some dark red in the Rio Grande Basin. It's very dry. The Rio Grande for the Rio Grande Compact is measured at the Del Norte gauge, and normally peak flows at the gauge occur in early to mid-June, and the river already peaked. It peaked a few weeks ago, and it peaked at 2,800 CFS, so it was about a month earlier and about 700 CFS lower than average. Usually the peak lasts for a week or two if we're lucky, and the peak was just for one day. It spiked up and went down, and so there's not a lot of snow left. We're all pretty nervous to see if pumping is going to be very high. I think we can assume that that's going to be the case. And I know a bunch of ranchers are already concerned about lack of pasture. And at my board meeting last week, numerous ranchers had been talking about where they had already sold their cows. So it's a pretty disappointing time. And I think we're going to feel this for years to come. Where many of the directors have talked about the benefit of storage, the compounding impact is that we are in the process of draining Rio Grande Reservoir, because the Rio Grande Cooperative Project will have its first year of construction this year, which is a very exciting thing for the basin, but it's also added a layer of complication that in a drought year, we like to have storage, and our biggest and our only on-channel reservoir is draining. So luckily, the Rio Grande water users and other reservoir companies have all been working together to find homes for the water that we can. And I wanted to mention specifically Santa Maria and Continental Reservoirs, who were the recipient of some pretty major loans and grants in recent years to do some repairs of Continental Reservoir. They've been great partners now that they have their fully rehabbed reservoir. And so they've been doing exchanges of as much water as possible from Rio Grande into Continental. So that's been a really nice thing to see. Colorado Parks and Wildlife has also been a great partner, and Colorado Parks and Wildlife was part of the cooperative project through which Beaver Reservoir was rehabbed. And so we've been working with CPW, my district, the San Luis Valley Water Conservancy District, where we've moved a big chunk of Trans Mountain water over into Beaver. So it's been pretty great to have everybody working together and trying to find homes for this water so that we can store what we can. The radar has been the big item of conversation and action. CWCB staff have been critical in moving it forward. I just got a text. Alamosa County voted yesterday to be the entity they officially voted to purchase and own the radar, which is a huge step forward and really appreciated by all of the entities that have been working on this. We've been joking that we are like the dog that caught the car. You know, we all have been working so hard to get the funding and figure it out. And then now it's in place and we're saying, oh, well, who's going to own it? How are we going to do this? And we had thought about making a new authority or a whole new entity. And that's the path we were going down, which I think would work, but has complications. And so I'm incredibly grateful that Alamosa County has stepped up and said, well, it's going to be on the airport property. It makes sense for them to own it and for us to be participators in the operation, but not actually have to form a new entity to manage it. So that's a huge commitment from the county, and we're all very appreciative. Joe Busto has been helping out quite a bit on the technical side as we're preparing the RFPs and getting ready to go out to bid. I don't know about you guys, but I've never bought a radar, so I don't think many people have. So we've been all trying to figure out how to get this document put together. Kirk has been outstanding. Thank you, Kirk. He's not even listening. Just kidding. Kirk has been wonderful. The funding for this project is coming through 3 different sources. And so I don't know if he elected himself or was voluntold, but he has been our champion in coordinating it. So thank you so much for handling that and being our guy on that. A significant source of the funding for the radar project will be coming through REACT, which is the Rio Grande Watershed Emergency Action Coordination Team. It's a coalition of stakeholders that was formed after the West Fork Complex fire, and REACT was fortunate to receive $2.5 million from an executive order from the governor for post-fire impacts. Part of that executive order, it specifically noted there could be an opportunity to use some of those funds for the radar project, which would have big benefits in the weather tracking and also an emergency response. So it fits well into the post-fire response. The executive order will expire in July, and it's very unlikely we'll be able to get the funds expended by then for the radar. And so we've asked staff to help us pursue an extension of those funds so that we can get through this year and get the funds spent and finish this great project. And so thank you to Directors Randall, Stolp, and Mitchell for helping us move that forward and working with the governor's office for the extension. We have a handful of upcoming tours. Hopefully, if you wanted to come on the WECO tour, you've reserved your spot, because I think that they are filling up fast. And I actually got waitlisted, so hopefully I get a spot. So I think it's going to be a great couple days, and we've got some neat stuff lined out. We also are putting together some neat roundtable tours with a Colorado Water Plan grant that Colorado Open Lands received. So that will include checking out projects that have been completed through roundtable funds and providing a local opportunity to showcase the projects. But then we're also going to be traveling over to the Gunnison Basin, and we'd like to come up here and learn about some projects that we have heard about and we think might have applicability in our basin. And so I think we're very excited for those tours. And last, our roundtable continues to discuss projects and host really interesting speakers. And we're really focusing on our education efforts. And so we've got a new website underway and the tours and just kind of revamping how we get our message out and what the message is. And I wanted to thank Megan Holcomb, because she has been really great and she makes an effort to come down to almost every meeting and attend our executive committee and the roundtable meetings himself. And then I know that people in the basin have really appreciated your work in helping with grants. So thanks, Megan. And that's my report.
Any questions for Director Dutton? All right, thank you.
Sure.
And now, certainly not least, but last, Director Gallagher with the Yampa, white and green.
You can just leave it up there for right now. It's the last item. First, I want to say thank you to our hosts here at the Upper Arkansas, the Water District, for arranging our bike tour and our reception. That was very informative for those of us who aren't so familiar. This is my first trip back to Salida after 40 years, and things have changed. Some things haven't changed, but what a great community this is. I'm so pleased to be here. Every time I come down the Arkansas Valley, I admire the views, and I say, this is really Colorado here. This is what we always think of Colorado. So this is a great place to be, and I look forward to spending more time here. I also want to join all of you in welcoming our new directors, Anderson and Director Trick, to our group here. I think you'll find that we're easy to work with. We can have a fun time, as you probably saw last night, with our staff, keeping us entertained as well. There are prizes involved too. I also want to thank Director George for your thoughtful comments on the West Slope risk study. And I think we all share those views on the West Slope, and I hope we can work together as a state to use that to answer some questions that we have statewide and basin-wide. Also, thanks to the Colorado River District and the Southwest District and the chairs of the 4 Western Slope roundtables for their leadership in clarifying our objectives for that phase 3. So I think we've made some progress there, and certainly in a more cohesive way and coherent way than we had 3 years ago when we met in December. Was it 2014? I think it was, maybe 5 years ago. Like the South Platte and North Platte, the Yampa White Green Basin benefited by the late snows and recovered from its low of 66% in late February to near 90% in April. We were very fortunate. Still, runoff will be early because most of the lower valley runoff had occurred in as early as March, and our snowpack has now quickly dropped to about 50% this week of average. it's going to run off fast. Last week, the Yampa peaked at 2,700 CFS. This is very low. This is about 4 weeks early and the lowest since the low peak of 1,600 CFS in late April 2012. So it's a recurrence, not as bad as 2012, but certainly a reminder of how bad that year was. So the northern tier isn't escaping either. And we don't have storage. The question is, what will happen in the following year? And we know every year is different. In our basin news, just a news item here, Marcia Dockerbach, who some or many of you know, retired from her position at the end of April as the longtime executive director of the Community Ag Alliance for the Yampa Valley. Since 1992, Marcia has led the efforts of the Ag Alliance to preserve and promote the agricultural heritage of the Yampa Valley, and among them, educating our many new residents about agriculture in Colorado, particularly in Northwest Colorado, and developing a website for providing local produce for restaurants and locavores. Marcia also served as our Roundtable's contractor for our educational outreach program under PEPO. And she's done an outstanding job in organizing informative basin water forums. And I want to extend our sincere thanks to Marcia for her community leadership and service. Her successor is Patrick Stanko, who hails from an old ranching family near Steamboat. In other basin news, last Saturday was Colorado Public Lands Day. So on an invitation from a friend, I traveled down to Yampa River State Park, it's just south of Craig, to a put-in site on the river where stakeholders held a ribbon cutting ceremony to celebrate the completion of campsite improvements in the 32-mile reach below Craig known as the Little Yampa Canyon. Recreational boaters have discovered this over the time, and it's 32 miles where a permit is not required, and it's calm water, so it's family friendly, and you can use small craft on it. Of course, it does get shallow and on the natural hydrograph. This project, improvements project, is a collaborative effort of the BLM's Little Snake Field Office. Let me first of all point out the reach here. So let's see, there's the laser. So there's Craig, and Maybell is down over here to give you an idea. If you're familiar with the river a little bit, that's where the oxbows are. So it's this stretch of the river that comes down through here and hooks around over here and ends up as a takeout just above the oxbows in that green area on the left side of the slide there. 32 miles. There were a lot of dispersed campsites in this area, probably a dozen or so, and that kind of camping is not conducive to riparian health. So what the Yampa State Park folks did at CPW, from CPW, they wanted to select a certain number of those sites for development and then clean up the old sites, which is what some volunteers did. The volunteers were from the Friends of the Yampa, the Northwest Colorado Parrot Heads, which is a service-oriented service organization in Craig, and also a veteran service organization called the Mission Continues, which is comprised of combat veterans who are who have come back and are putting themselves to work on the river and enjoying the canyon. These volunteers have cleaned up and improved 5 existing campsites on BLM lands along this reach to enhance the recreational experience for paddlers and protect the riparian environment. Their work included vegetation management, adding picnic tables and fire rings, and installing riverside signposts to designate the official campsites. We were joined by a number of people for the ribbon cutting, including the mayor of Craig and one of the Moffat County commissioners. So we're very well pleased to to have that local participation by Moffat County elected officials. So I'm going to just go through a couple of the slides here for you. So that's actually down by the terminus, down at the first Oxbows. As you can see, there's not a ripple in sight. It's beautiful country, especially green this time of year. Most of this work was done during the spring when it's pretty. The temperatures rise above 50 degrees in March. And these are some of the veterans in their group who are assembling picnic tables for these sites, and which minimizes the impact so they're not spread out across a whole bottom. And there they are with their sign. And some presenters at the ribbon cutting. And there's the ribbon cutting. On the left is John Ponegrar, Mayor Craig, Ray Beck, Moffat County Commissioner, Ben Bell, City Engineer for the City of Steamboat Springs and Vice President of the Friends of the Yampa, Jacob Bray, who is the manager of the Yampa State Park, Yampa River State Park, Dario Archuleta, who's the Recreation Manager for the BLM, Little Snake Field Office in Craig, Calder, Calder Young, who's the regional coordinator for the Mission Continues, myself, and then Kelly Lewis, who's a Yampa River State Park Ranger. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I conclude my report.
All right. Thank you, Director Gallagher.
One last thing. We do have the Yampa River Festival in May, beginning May 31st to June 3rd. The kickoff will be a forum on the state of the Yampa at the Chief Theater downtown, which is our performance environment there, performance venue. And over the weekend, there will be kayaking races and performance events on Fish Creek in the Yampa River.
Thank you, Director Gallagher. Your report is a lot nicer because of the background music. We should all have background music. Thank you. Any questions for Director Gallagher? All right. Well, thank you to all your directors for your reports. We are now scheduled for a break, so we'll take a 10-minute break. So about 10:35, we'll come back and start up again. Wattenberg, who just walked in the room, and everybody wanted to go see him. So, all right. Well, we'll continue on with agenda item number 26, aquatic nuisance species update. Michelle Garrison. That's right.
Good morning. Michelle Garrison, CWCB staff for the record. And I'm going to keep this short because I'm not actually giving the presentation. So I am pleased to introduce Mr. Robert Walters from Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And he is here to give you the good news. The board has been so supportive of CPW and its struggles to adequately fund the aquatic nuisance species program and keep Colorado protected from invasive mussels during the crash of the severance tax funding. And I wanted CPW to be able to come here and give you the good news themselves and tell you what it means to them to have gotten a bill passed that gives them some long-term stable funding to add to that severance tax funding, and what that means to their program going forward, plus an update of what's been going on in 2017 and 2018 under the budget crunch, what they were able to accomplish. So with that, I will be quiet and let Robert come up and let you give you all some good news after all that bad news drought talk. So here's Robert.
All right. Welcome, Robert. State your name and who you're with.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle and members of the board. Again, my name is Robert Walters. I'm the invasive species specialist for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and I certainly do appreciate this opportunity to provide you an update on our statewide invasive species program. So just a little bit on our program so everybody knows who we are and what we're doing. Our ANS program has a mission to protect wildlife, recreation, natural resources, infrastructure, and the economy by preventing the introduction of zebra and quagga mussels, as well as other aquatic invasive species, by containing species that are currently present in our state and stopping their spread into new locations. Of course, this is a pretty large task with many challenges, but we have a lot of guidance as to how we perform those activities, which primarily comes from our state zebra and quagga mussel management plan. This management plan was put together in 2008 and implementation began shortly after in 2009. This is certainly a partnership effort. While CPW takes on the burden of most of the work, we certainly have many partners out there that are contributing to our program as well. There's three main components to our program: sampling, watercraft inspection and decontamination, and of course, education. And I'll give you a brief update on most of those activities. So just real quick to kind of show you the scope of our inspection program here in the state of Colorado. In 2017, we were very fortunate to operate 72 inspection locations across the state. The majority of those are operated by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, but we do also have municipalities, counties, federal contributions from the National Park Service down at Kiraconte, and many private industry contributors as well. We feel that we have a very broad net of inspection stations across the state that make it pretty easy for boaters to comply with our regulations and offer us a high level of protection. We do a heck of a lot of inspections here in the state of Colorado. On an annual basis, we perform about 470,000 boat inspections here in the state. Yes, that is a heck of a lot of inspections, but we strongly feel this is the only way to prevent things like zebra and quagga mussels from being introduced into our state. So we delegate significant resources to that prevention effort. We also do a lot of what we refer to as decontaminations. Decontaminations is essentially applying hot water to a boat prior to launch to make sure that it is not a biological risk prior to entering the water body. We don't use any soaps, bleaches, chemicals, anything like that that could contaminate the water. It is strictly hot water we use for this purpose. We perform about 15,000 decontaminations of boats here in the state on an annual basis. Through our inspection program, the number of boats that we find coming into Colorado with adult attached mussels is quite alarming. Since the inception of our program in 2009, we have intercepted 144 vessels coming into our state that did have confirmed adult zebra or quagga mussel populations on them. If we weren't out there implementing this inspection program, I feel very confident these would have been introduced into our waters already. Unfortunately, the trend on this is that we see more and more of these boats coming into our state on an annual basis. In 2017, we saw a record year with 26 confirmed interceptions. That's not a point of bragging. It's just a testament to the fact that we are facing an increased risk here in our state on an annual basis. Our busiest boating waters continue to see the most interceptions on an annual basis, places like Horsetooth, Lake Pueblo, and Blue Mesa reservoirs. But we start to see these at locations that have never seen them in the past. In 2017, we had our first interceptions at Boulder Reservoir, Boyd Lake, McPhee Reservoir down in the southwest, as well as Steamboat and Stagecoach up in Routt County. These locations had never seen these type of vessels in the past. 26 was pretty rough for us in terms of the amount of infested boats we intercepted. This year, we're on that same trajectory. We've already intercepted 9 infested boats coming into our state during the 2018 season. So this is certainly something that we do need to keep up. So where are all these infested boats coming from? Well, these species were first introduced in the Great Lakes region in the late 1980s. We continue to see the most boats coming into our state from that region, with Wisconsin being the #1 offender in the 2017 season. But a growing problem that we are currently facing is the infestations that are quickly growing in the southwest, particularly the one that is exploding down at Lake Powell. So just a couple slides to kind of show you the scope of the issue we're facing down there at Lake Powell. In 2012, they first detected mussel veligers in the far southwest corner of the lake. We fast forward only 4 years, and they now consider the entire Lake Powell region to be completely infested with quagga mussels. Of course, this is a water body that is significantly larger than anything we have here in our state. I believe that if they can take over Lake Powell over the course of only 4 years, it could be much faster than that if we saw one of these really establish here in our waters. So Lake Powell's not in Colorado, so why is this a big deal to us? Well, because Colorado boaters love to go to Lake Powell. We saw a study come out of the state of Utah in 2017 that told us 20% of the boats leaving the Bullfrog launch area at Lake Powell were destined for Colorado. That's 1 in every 5 boats that leaves Lake Powell is headed for our state. Every single one of them has high potential to be transporting one of the life stages of the zebra or quagga mussel, so this is a significant risk. We do share our data collection system with the state of Utah, who does the majority of the boat inspections out there at Lake Powell. So we can actually map where all these different boats from Lake Powell show up in our state. As you can see in this map, we don't have a single inspection station here in Colorado that does not see Lake Powell boats on a routine basis. Another thing to take out of this, you can see there's 3 stars on this map. Those are indicative of infested boats that showed up in Colorado with adult quagga mussels. I put this map together at the end of 2016. At that time, we had intercepted 3 boats from Lake Powell with adult mussels on them. 2017, we saw more than a doubling of that, with 4 boats from Lake Powell showing up here in Colorado. That seemed pretty tough on us until the spring of 2018. So far in the spring of 2018, we have already intercepted 4 boats from Lake Powell that were completely infested with mussels. I see a lot of drop jaws out there. That's the reaction we should be having. These aren't pictures I took off the internet. I don't know what these people are thinking, but you know, this used to be something that only showed up like on the internet and in books and things, but these are pictures that I took of a boat that showed up over in Grand Junction. When this thing showed up in Grand Junction, it had only been off the water for 24 hours. It had tens of thousands of living mussels on it. If we weren't out there doing our inspections, this thing may have ended up in our waters and would have caused irreversible damage. It's very, very concerning that people are bringing these things into our state. If you think this boat is operational, you're certainly fooling yourself. That thing is in very bad condition. All right, we have had some pretty significant updates to our Parks and Wildlife ANS regulations here in the last couple years. In January of 2017, we updated our regulations to have some more specific requirements for the boating public. They now have a requirement to clean, drain, and dry their boat in between each launch. It's not our responsibility to clean, drain, and dry their boat. It's just ours to make sure they're actually complying. We also have a requirement for them to remove water drain plugs upon exiting the water body and remove aquatic vegetation. We also prohibit the overland transport of boats with drain plugs in or aquatic plants attached. By having those drain plugs out when people are transporting their vessel, boats much more thoroughly drain, which greatly reduces the risk of these species being transferred from water to water. 2017, we considered this an educational year for the boating public. 2018, we are beginning enforcing on people for violating these regulations. 2018, we had another pretty significant update to our regulation. For anyone that's not aware, we have what we consider exempt vessels here in the state of Colorado. There are now 10 vessels that are considered exempt from our inspection process. This regulation update added this awesome thing, the foldable plastic boat, to our exempt vessel list. But more significantly, it added language that says boats have to be hand launched and hand powered in order to be exempt from inspection. Previously here in Colorado, we had exempted electric motors from inspection in our state. That is no longer the case. Any electric motor does require inspection. There are some reasons for this. One is that those electric motors do carry potential to carry plant material. There's also been a lot of changes to electric motors in the last few years. We now see electric water-cooled engines. We see electric inboard motors. We see electric jet motors on paddle boards going down the river. So there's a lot of changes to electric motors in the last couple years. So we view this as more of a risk than it was in the past. All right, moving on from our inspection program to our sampling and monitoring. In 2017, despite some budget cuts, we were still able to get quite a bit of sampling done. We sampled 167 standing waters in the state, as well as 5 flowing waters during the 2017 season. This seems like a lot, but it's a lot less than we would like to be doing. Again, this is just related to our budget reduction. We weren't able to sample quite as much as we would like. We did do quite a bit of sampling still out there. As you can see, we focus our efforts on early detection. We want to know as soon as possible what's out there in the water body, and we do that primarily through what we refer to as a plankton tow. In 2017, we still performed over 1,700 plankton tows, so still doing the best we can with our resources. In 2017, we also detected a few new invasive species populations here with the state of Colorado. The majority of those were New Zealand mud snail populations. These detections took place at 4 Mile Canyon Creek in Boulder, the Gunnison River west of Delta, Lone Rock on the South Platte River, Monument Lake, and the Uncompahgre within the town of Montrose. More significantly, we did have a detection of quagga mussel veligers up at Green Mountain Reservoir. So let me tell you a little bit more about that. Those mussel veligers were detected by the Bureau of Reclamation in their standard sampling protocols. They did detect 12 mussel veligers in a single sample, which is relatively high density. We did have those samples sent off for 2 forms of genetic testing. All these tests did come back as positive, so we are confident that these were truly mussel veligers. What we don't know is whether they were actually ever alive or dead in the water body. They were pretty well degraded at the time of detection, so we continue to do a lot of sampling up there. Per the regional standard, 1 detection means the Green Mountain Reservoir is now considered suspect for the presence of quagga mussel veligers. Suspect is still too much of a risk for us, so we have enacted what we refer to as containment protocols at Green Mountain Reservoir. What that means is we inspect every boat as it comes off the water, and if they are destined for another location, they go through a decontamination so we don't run the risk of them transporting this water to another location. We have continued to do a heck of a lot of sampling up there at Green Mountain. Post-detection in August, we did 6 additional sampling trips up there. We performed over 100 plankton tows. We gridded out the entire reservoir. We scoured the shorelines. We sent a scuba dive team up there, and we found no additional evidence of quagga mussels up there. So again, we have 1 detection. That means that Green Mountain is considered suspect for the presence of quagga mussel veligers. Over the winter, we did put together a site-specific team consisting of ourselves, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Reclamation, and Summit County to try to bolster up the inspection program up there at Green Mountain Reservoir. We were very fortunate to get a grant from the Bureau of Reclamation to enhance the infrastructure up there, increase our decontamination capacity, improve traffic flow, and that is under construction as we speak. We did open up Green Mountain Reservoir to boating just last Friday. We're currently operating at the Big Green boat launch area as improvements are made at the marina. All right, now moving on to our budget. So Senate Bill 08-226 back in 2008 did provide funding to our state invasive species program at approximately $4 million per year through Tier 2 severance tax. We did seek additional contributions from our partners every year moving forward to reach us a total annual budget of approximately $5 million. As was mentioned, 2016, there was a ruling in favor of BP America that drastically reduced those severance tax obligations and did have some pretty significant implications on our ANS budget. 2017 was a little bit of a struggle for us. We did utilize essentially a bank account that we had built up to fund our program, as well as CPW agency cash, donations, grants, cost shares, and a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service motorboat grant to get us through the 2017 season, kind of operating at a minimum level. 2018, we have covered primarily from a general fund allocation from Senate Bill 17-259 that gave us about $3.6 million, as well as some significant partner contributions. I'm not going to read through all these, but just to kind of highlight some of the folks that did provide us fiscal contributions to keep us going in the 2017 season. Our range of partners that provided funding out there went from water providers to federal municipalities, local municipalities, counties, even some local sportsmen's groups that gave us money to keep their private, or not private, but favorite reservoirs operating and protected. So very glad to see that contribution and the support of the public out there for keeping this program operational. 2018 again is being funded from that Bill 17-259 general fund allocation, as well as continuing support from our partners out there, the Forest Service, Bureau of Reclamation, water providers, the Marine Dealers Association. The list goes on and on and on in terms of folks that are out there making contributions to keep us operational. All right, some more good news from us. 2018, the Interim Water Resource Review Committee did introduce the Mussel-Free Colorado Act. The Mussel-Free Colorado Act did make it through both the House and the Senate with very little resistance, which was excellent news for us. This was signed in by the governor in kind of an official ceremony and more of a show ceremony just yesterday down there at Pueblo Reservoir, which was a pretty cool thing to be a part of. This bill is going to be enacted starting in 2019. So a couple key components to this piece of legislation. This will allow us to secure some sustainable funding, primarily through the form of a stamp that Colorado boaters would be required to purchase in addition to their vessel registration. This stamp would come at a cost of $25 for resident boaters and $50 for out-of-state boaters, and these funds will go directly to fund our ANS program. In addition to that, this does allow us to increase some of the penalties associated with violations of our regulation and our statute. Currently, someone who illegally launches their boat without an inspection is subject to a fine of a whopping $50. This will jump that up to $100. Currently, someone who is knowingly importing ANS into our state is subject to a fine of $150. This will jump that up to $500. And probably more significantly, this will allow us to recover costs associated with the decontamination of highly infested vessels. So like that boat I showed you pictures of in Grand Junction, that takes us a good 100 hours to properly decontaminate that thing. Those costs are currently being absorbed by the state. This would allow us to seek reimbursement for that time and resources that we put into those decontaminations. This bill also allows us to maintain our original funding, so it allows us to continue that Tier 2 severance tax revenue up to $4 million if and when that becomes available. And it also combined what was once our Division of Wildlife and State Parks ANS funds into one cooperative fund. So just to kind of wrap things up and give you a little forecast here, 2017 again was covered by that remaining severance tax, partner fund, and the motorboat grant. 2018 is being covered by that Senate Bill 17-259 general fund allocation, as well as our partner funds. 2019, we anticipate starting to see revenue from the Mussel-Free Colorado Act at approximately $2 million. We did receive another general fund allocation from House Bill 1338 at about $3.4 million, and we hope to see partner funds continue. So we're looking pretty good for 2019. 2020, we hope to be somewhere around full compliance with the Mussel-Free Colorado Act. At full compliance, that bill or that stamp will generate about $2.4 million in revenue. Of course, that's only half of our budget, so we will continue to seek partner funds and hope that we see some of that Tier 2 severance tax come in to supplement that $2.4 million to keep us fully operational moving forward. Of course, my supervisor, Miss Elizabeth Brown, is also making great efforts to seek federal legislation and federal funding that would also supplement what we're getting here at the state level. All right, so that wraps up my update on our statewide invasive species program, and we're all very fortunate to have these beautiful aquatic resources and things here in the state, and I certainly feel it's all of our duty to do everything we can to keep them in the condition that they are today. So appreciate the opportunity to provide this update and gladly take a question or two if anybody has one.
Thank you, Robert. Any questions for Robert? Director Wells?
Is it fair to say that the Bureau is starting to step up in its participation? It looks like it from your slides.
Yes, I would say that's a fair assessment. They did provide, I believe, $440,000 to bolster some of the infrastructure up at Green Mountain, the Colorado Big Thompson project, as well as Larimer County and the Estes Park Recreation District. On the West Slope, we're currently engaged in some conversations where through our current agreement with their state parks, they would be able to provide some funding to support those programs as well. So they certainly are stepping it up.
Other questions? Director Dutton?
I just have a comment. Thank you for coming today for this update, and thank you for everything that you're doing. You know how critical it is, and I appreciate you sharing with us. And it's really impressive what you guys are doing with the resources that you have and taking care of our water resources. So thank you.
And I too want to thank you. One of my reservoirs was on there. You intercepted a boat from Lake Powell, I saw. So North Sterling Reservoir, you had an interception last year, and it had a star by it. We don't often get stars up in our area, but we got a star there. So anyway, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate all you've done at the North Sterling and Pruitt reservoirs, to keep these infestations out of our reservoirs. And I was in Washington, D.C. just last week, and I was on a FBI tour. And as I was waiting for the tour, I was sitting next to a couple from Michigan. So we discussed two things. One was marijuana, and the other was zebra mussels. So in Michigan, it's an interesting combination. Yeah. But anyway, but it was, they told me it's a real problem, and we don't want it. And I told them the same thing about marijuana, but no, just
different topic. No.
So anyway, it is something we don't want in our lakes, and so I appreciate your efforts.
My pleasure. And North Sterling is a place we do see an increased risk on an annual basis. The walleye fishing out there has been absolutely incredible the last couple of years. So sorry to tell your secret, but we can send them all over to Jumbo if that makes you feel any better. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, continuing on with agenda item 27, System Conservation Pilot Program. Michelle, again.
All right. Good morning, Michelle Gerson, CWCB staff for the record again for agenda item 27. And I would like to apologize. Andrew is passing around a red flag board memo updated just recently. So I'll try to give you some time to take a look at that. So I'm going to give you a very, very brief overview of what's been going on with the System Conservation Pilot Program. And then if you would like more information, we can do it at another time. But for the purposes of time, we'll keep this one really short. So the System Conservation Pilot Program, the purpose of this program was to test the feasibility and effectiveness of temporary, compensated, voluntary water demand management as a drought mitigation tool. This was funded by originally 4 municipal water users that depend on Colorado River Basin water, Denver Water, Southern Nevada Water Authority, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and the Central Arizona Water Conservation District. And after this initial agreement, the Bureau of Reclamation was able to secure some funds to add to the program as well. So the four original funders signed an agreement in 2014 that they would work together to support some pilot conservation programs in both the upper and lower basin. They worked together on all of the projects in both basins. So Denver Water reviewed the projects that were going on in the lower basin. The lower basin entities reviewed the projects for the upper basin. They worked together. They all helped fund all of them. The proportion of money that was spent was proportional to the amount that had been put in by those four entities. So the upper basin got the same amount of money as Denver Water had put in, but it didn't all come from Denver Water because they all shared funds. And then when Reclamation added money, that was split in that same proportion. So the original agreement was for 2015 and 2016. And so when we originally brought this to you in 2015, all the information we shared was about what we thought was going to go on in 2015 and 2016. So we thought maybe it was a time to give you a little bit of an update. So it was renewed now through 2018, that original agreement. Some other partners have come to the table with funding, but as per the original agreement, they contribute funds through the original funders, and they don't come to the table as a separate funding entity at this time. So some folks like Walton Family Foundation have contributed funds through the municipalities that are part of the original agreement. So the first projects in the lower basin, I believe, kicked off in 2014. It was 2015 by the time we were able to get the UCRC on board and agreeing to be the implementer and contractor for the projects in the upper basin. So the first projects in the upper basin started in 2015. In 2015, we had 5 projects in Colorado and 5 in Wyoming, and we'll get to that in a minute. Through 2017, the SCPP has funded a total of 45 projects in the upper basin with an estimated 22,000 acre feet conserved. For a price tag of $4.56 million. The lower basin has spent considerably more money, fewer but much larger projects. So here's just the numbers by year. In 2015, only Colorado and Wyoming had projects. In 2016, Colorado had 8 projects. There were a couple of projects in New Mexico, 1 in Utah, 9 in Wyoming. By 2017, we were running on mostly remaining funding from the original agreement. So funds were a little tight. So in 2017, we had a lot of applications, but we weren't able to accept and fund as many projects. So the numbers, the lower numbers in 2017 represent a funding restriction, not fewer applicants to the program. So Colorado has had a total of 15 out of the 45 projects that have been funded. We had a mix of different types of projects. We have some full fallow projects. We have a lot of split season deficit irrigation type of projects for grass, hay, and alfalfa, where they choose usually after the first cutting, sometimes after the second cutting, sometimes other part of the year, depending on their operation. And they just skipped irrigating in a certain part of the season. Those were very common. Here in Colorado, we've had a couple of things that were a mixture of deficit irrigation of some particular crops, not just hay, grass, hay, and alfalfa, but some other crops, forage crops, and some alternative lower water consumption cropping. And then we had a couple of projects that were a combination. And we've had a couple of municipal projects, and one of those was in Colorado as well. So here are the maps of 2015 and 2016. Color-coded by project type, but you can kind of see the distribution in Wyoming all up in on the green. And then in Colorado, a nice mix. Yampa, headwaters of the Colorado, and down in the Gunnison. And several of these were multi-year projects. Some of them were conversion to organic, some were not, but several things that were multi-year. And then in 2016, Wyoming looks pretty similar. There's the one in Utah, the 2 in New Mexico that were 2 different kinds of projects. And then in Colorado, we had couple different type of projects in a couple years. And again, this really nice geographical distribution kind of all over the west, over most of the west slope, not all of the west slope, but a nice geographical distribution of projects. These ranged in size from 20 acres to over 1,000 acres. Prices ranged, lots of different things range. We had a lot of variability in Colorado. In Wyoming, these were all split season irrigation of grass hay, because that's what's up there. But we have this nice mix, and we got a nice mix of projects. And then for 2017, with the limited funding, the proponents selected some more projects in Utah and New Mexico. Since they had participated less in the previous years, they kind of got priority in that limited funding year. But we still had a couple, one very large and one pretty small, in two different parts of the Colorado Basin, and Wyoming got a few as well. And this is the year that we had applications from all throughout the basin, but could only fund two. They refreshed the fund for 2018, so there's a lot more funding available for 2018 than there was 2017. Prices have gone down, so not all of the people who were interested in 2017 were interested in applying again in 2018 at the lower price. So we didn't see as many applications in Colorado for 2018. We did have 4 that were selected through the contracting process and the estimate of how much money they would be paid. 2 of those have dropped out. So Colorado for 2018 is down to 2 projects that are in the contracting process right now that we expect to be implemented. And it's a bit of a disappointment that the other 2 dropped out. I think they had good reason to do so, but I will get to that in a minute, kind of where this program stands. So some of the funders like the momentum that they're seeing in this project and the interest. And so there is some interest with some groups in continuing this pilot program for additional years. Other people and the states are kind of torn. My personal opinion, not representing anybody for just a second, is that we learned a lot of great things. This was just to test some ideas and test some feasibility, what's possible, would people be interested, what would that look like, how would it work. This wasn't about ensuring a certain amount of water to Lake Powell, even though eventually that's what we would want. If you did this program, eventually what you'd want is somebody would pay for water and you would have a way to get it to a particular place for a particular reason. When we did this program and the funding came up quickly, we said, well, there's no way we can get to all of those issues, but that was part of the point of the project, was to test all the different things and see what we could learn about how it works for split season irrigation. How does it work for full fallow? Who's interested where? What are the impediments? And so we've learned a lot of good things. Given the fact that in 2017 and 2018, both years we were looking at 1 year of funding, 1 year projects. I think we've kind of seen pretty much everything we're going to see in terms of who's willing to do it and what types of projects they're willing to do. I think there is some interest in multi-year projects, that the way the last 2 years of funding for SCPP have gone, we haven't been able to explore those other types of projects that people might be interested in. And so I'm a little torn as to whether or not there's a lot of benefit to going forward with it as is, but there is some discussion about, do you take a pause or not, and think about what you learned and what might be a better way to put together a program to learn some other things you can't learn by the way this program was set up. So that's kind of where we are. And the one thing we were going to ask of, well, first I should ask, are there questions?
Any questions for Director Goebel?
Thanks, Michelle. I was just curious what the general process was to determine how much water is saved.
So in terms of the contracting and what they were paid for, in Colorado, We used our CDSS tools and diversion records to make an estimate of the average consumptive use. We kind of looked at kind of the crop history and the average consumptive use on that parcel as best we could, or the consultants did. I didn't, but and they made an estimate of what the average was, and then an estimate if you followed that part or you followed that part for that amount of time, how much that would save, and their compensation was based on that. As they went back through and tried to estimate savings after the fact, most of the people under contract were paid based on what their average consumptive use was and what it would be after their conservation activity. So you were paid for the conservation activity that you undertook, and they verified that you undertook that conservation activity, whatever it is you said you would do. It was shutting off a head gate to this many fields, and you did it, and we thought at the beginning that would save X amount of water, then that's what you got paid for. And then after the fact, they went back through, because in any given year, wet year, dry year, rains, doesn't rain, the actual consumptive use changes. And that's something that bears further consideration. And we knew that going in, is if you were going to do this in real time, in a real program, what would you do about that? And I don't think we've come to any conclusions, but we've learned a lot. So after the fact, they took whatever data they had. So in Wyoming, they might have been looking at remote sensing data. Here, they would look at the actual hydrology of that year and look at what water they thought was available to that water user and estimate it from those conditions, the temperature and precip and available water that we saw in that particular year. So it was done differently based on what data they had in the different states.
They were paid on the front end.
So they were paid one payment on the front end when they signed the contract, half. And then at the end of the project, after it had been verified that they had performed all of the conservation activities they said they would, they got the other half of their money after. So, which is another thing that was up for discussion in terms of different people maybe want paid different ways. And that's how this particular one was set up. So, yes.
How closely did that match the upfront average consumptive use to what you determined at the end?
Pretty well, actually. And part of that for Colorado is we use the same method to estimate up front as we did to verify after the fact. But they did pretty well. And given that those years had fairly decent water supplies, in general, we found that most of the projects saved just a little more than the average estimate, and a few saved a little less. I would expect in 2018 being a drier year, depending on the seniority of each person's water supply, this could be a year when we actually see that the amount we think actually was conserved may be less than the average. But because we had a couple of years where the water supply was pretty good, the average was a pretty good guess.
Questions? Okay, continue.
Right. And so one of the reasons we brought this back to you, different states have different authorities and laws and ways of dealing with people who participated in these programs. For Colorado, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to try to do anything but read this to you because I will make a mistake. So in the statutes, section 3792-305C, in determining the amount of historical consumptive use for a water right in division 4, 5, or 6, the water judge shall not consider any decrease in use resulting from the following. The land on which the water from the water right has been historically applied is enrolled under a federal land conservation program, or so on and so forth till we get to the bottom here. A water conservation program in Part A approved by a state agency, water conservation district, water district, water authority. And so as we look at A here, in 2015, Ted Kowalski had asked the board to affirm that the System Conservation Pilot Program as undertaken by the UCRC for the participants who were in the state of Colorado be recognized as a water conservation program approved by the Colorado Water Conservation Board to provide that water court protection for anybody who diverted less than they normally do, who might end up in water court in the next 10 years. So those reduced diversions do not count against them in water court. The second piece talks about abandonment and the fact that any period of non-use that was part of a water conservation program approved by a state agency, again, does not count in abandonment either. So those were the two pieces that we brought to you originally, with a lot of different information than what we've learned over the last 3 years about where we're going with drought contingency planning, what happened with the program, the extension of the program, and all of those things. So we just wanted to bring that back to you as a recommendation that the board reaffirm that the UCRC System Conservation Pilot Program for Colorado participants would be considered approved as a water conservation program in Colorado. And
All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, we have a recommendation before us. What is the board's pleasure?
Would move approval of the staff recommendation to affirm the pilot program as an approved water conservation program.
It's been moved by Director Wells, seconded by Director Gallagher, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 27. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Michelle. Now we have agenda item 28, update on the Upper Colorado Recovery Implementation Program. Michelle again.
Oh, and this one is not short, so I apologize. But I do believe we have a lot of new board members. For the board members who were here the last time I gave it, I apologize that you're going to suffer through another presentation on this. But a lot of things have been happening in the recovery programs separate from the typical year-to-year stuff that's going on. So we wanted to bring this to you today. And for those of you who already know this, you can relax. Because some of these things are going on with both, although we put on the agenda that it was Upper Colorado River, I'm going to talk a little bit about the San Juan River Recovery Program as well. For those who are not familiar, the Upper Colorado River Program was established in 1988, and the San Juan River Program was established in 1992. Both of them are cooperative partnerships between several federal agencies, state agencies, including the CWCB and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and the Department of Natural Resources, water users, NGOs, and particularly in the San Juan program, several tribes. And the goal has been to recover the endangered fish while allowing water development to continue in accordance with state and federal law and interstate compacts, and in the San Juan, any tribal obligations or tribal law that applies. Here are our 4 favorite ugly fish. So the top 2 apply to both the Colorado and San Juan programs. The Colorado pike minnow, which is the largest native predator in the system. The razorback sucker, the humpback chub, and bony tail are found in the Colorado River system only. But these 2 are in both programs. So program elements, the way these programs function, they focus on activities in the following categories: stream flow, and how to get the right stream flow to the right places when the fish need it, in accordance with state law and who owns what water. Habitat restoration, which is flow-induced or physical changes to the channel to provide additional habitat. Non-native fish management, which we'll talk about more later. Propagation and stocking, hatcheries, and getting some of those hatchery fish out into the river. Research and monitoring to figure out what's working and what's not, and what the populations of those fish are up and down the river streams. Information and education, and program management. So what are the benefits to Colorado of being part of this program and investing in this program? For the CWCB, I think the biggest one is that it provides Endangered Species Act compliance for the water depletions on the west slope. And it covers existing depletions, it covers some amount of new depletions, and for new depletions that need to get Section 7 consultations, they get a very streamlined process because the recovery program has actions in place that help offset the negative impacts of those depletions. And so as people come in and need Section 7 coverage, the program is there to provide that coverage. So they do some paperwork. Sometimes they have to write a check, but they don't have to do a lot of extra work on their own. So they get some certainty about how they can go about their business and use their water and not worry about surprises with the ESA. And the other one is the pooling of resources. And so these programs are somewhat unique in the ESA world in terms of their cooperation and collaboration. And that saves everybody a lot of money and headache litigation. There's some arguing amongst experts, but when you pool your money and you pool your expertise, sometimes you can come to some good decisions and do good work faster and for less money. And so I think we're getting some benefits there. So between the two programs, they cover 1,500 different water projects in Colorado, ranging from very small to very large, with current and future depletions of over 2.3 million acre feet. All receive coverage under these programs. The expenditures from inception of the program through 2018 for the Upper Colorado, total expenditures are just under $400 million, of which the state of Colorado has paid or provided in-kind services of just under 25 million. So we pay less than 6% of the cost of this program. And for the San Juan, the total expenditures are just over 78 million, of which we have provided a little over 1 million. So we pay less than 2% of the cost of the San Juan program, which makes sense because our critical habitat for the San Juan program is a pretty small portion of that river, whereas we cover a very large portion of the Upper Colorado program area-wise. The San Juan program numbers do not include the in-kind contributions that we make. Colorado Parks and Wildlife plays a huge role in all of the biology questions, the hatchery, the stocking, the non-native fish management, trying to determine what are the best actions to take biologically for these fish. The CWCB participates because a lot of these actions implicate water policy for the state, water law. So we rely on our help at the AG's office to make sure that the things that the recovery program wants to do can be done in ways that comply with state water law. And when they don't, then we have a chat about it. They can implicate future water development. So we stay involved to make sure that as certain activities go on or protections for certain flows are asked for, that those don't impede future water development in the state, because that's one of the important pieces of the program, is that we're supposed to try to do both and not be limiting water development if we can achieve it without. So we work hard on that piece. We spend a lot of our time on the flow targets that Fish and Wildlife Service would like to see in various parts of the river, the proposed reservoir operations, both voluntary and ones that Reclamation has agreed to do as part of EISs and biological opinions. We spend a lot of time in different parts of the river talking about the spring peak flows, helping plan those and coordinate those, and low flow augmentation in the summer. We spend a lot of our time on program management and the decisions regarding budget and direction of the program that we think fits within Colorado water policy. And the funding piece. Colorado had paid their portion of the original agreement of what we owed to both programs a long, long time ago. but we continue to utilize money from the Species Conservation Trust Fund to help fund new things that come up that we think are of benefit to the program that aren't in the program's regular budget. So items like the project at Orchard Mesa Irrigation District that we funded several years ago, where we helped fund the re-regulating reservoir and the check structures so that they can be more efficient with their water in times that they don't need their full amount, and some of that water can stay in the 15-mile reach instead of being diverted and returned below. We helped fund that. We are helping fund some of the non-native fish actions because the program budget hasn't been able to keep up with all of the non-native issues that keep coming up. And so we are spending some of our funds on those type of activities as well. So just a few quick highlights from 2017, and I'll focus mainly on what happened in 2017 with flows and with non-native fish management. And we'll talk about spring peak flows, late summer flows, and for non-native fish management, the big things that happened in Colorado this year were that the Elkhead fish net that we paid for to prevent escapement of non-natives out of Elkhead Reservoir into the river was put to use when Elkhead spilled. Elkhead spilled a lot, and it was good that that was finally in place to help prevent some of that escapement. In Ridgeway, there has been an illegal introduction of smallmouth bass, and Tri-County Water Conservation District has been actively managing Ridgeway to avoid spilling as long as they can. And even in 2017, which is a pretty good water year, they did manage to fill that reservoir without spilling so that we didn't have any escapement. In the future, we will probably be helping pay for a net for Ridgeway as well. So we've been scraping together Species Conservation Trust Fund money for a net at Ridgeway. And Species Conservation Trust Fund money is paying for the fishing tournaments at Elkhead and Ridgeway to try to remove some of those smallmouth bass and pike. Spring peak flows. There were operations to increase spring peak flows in the San Juan out of Navajo Dam, in the Yampa, in the Gunnison from the Aspinall unit. But the one I chose to show here was on the Colorado. The Colorado is a voluntary coordinated effort between multiple different reservoir operators, Denver Water, Aurora, Northern Water, the River District, and Reclamation all work together to take any excess water they have above what they need to fill and time it so that it comes down when the Colorado River is peaking, so that if we're in an area where we can do some good in terms of reworking the habitat without causing any flooding, they all bypass that excess inflow at the same time. And in 2017 was the third year in a row that they accomplished that. And we are getting a lot of excellent cooperation from all of those reservoir operators in terms of trying to make that happen every year that they can. 2018, you all know what the forecast looked like, so it's not going to happen in 2018. But in 2017, they bypassed over 37,000 acre feet that put an additional 2,400 CFS on that peak at the Cameo gauge. It was a huge accomplishment. Again, Aspinall, Elkhead, and Navajo all make releases in the summer. Navajo not last year, but when they are asked to and they have the water available, to put some more water in critical reaches during the late summer when it gets hot and it gets dry. But I'm going to show the graph that the division engineer put together for the Colorado. On the Colorado River, some of those same reservoir operators who have dedicated water to the program for this purpose released over 77,000 acre feet for the benefit of the 15-mile reach. And so the red is the flow that would have occurred had the extra releases not been made for the benefit of the fish. And the blue is what occurred with those extra releases. And important to note here on the green line is the average target that the Fish and Wildlife Service set for last year based on the fairly wet spring that we had. And then the summer got very, very dry. And so even with the releases, we weren't always able to meet their average target, but it's pretty important for the habitat that we do what we can to meet the dry year target when we can. And that's shown in the yellow at 810 CFS. And you can see that all the partners that are involved here that make those releases did an excellent job of changing what would have been flows well 300 CFS below that target to flows that stayed just above or a couple hundred CFS above that dry year target throughout that entire dry year season. And so although technically we did not meet the average year flow target, the program was very, very pleased that this effort keeps them out of those really low flows that don't provide sufficient habitat in that 15-mile reach for the fish. So this is considered a huge success here. Part of those releases included Linda Bassey's section's lease of 6,000 acre feet of water from Ute Water Conservancy District out of Rudai. They were willing to make up to 12,000 acre feet available, but based on the hydrology and the limitations we have on getting that water out of Rudai without exceeding the 300 CFS threshold, we were only able to get the first 6,000 acre feet out. But that did occur and it did make a difference. So I'd like to thank Linda and her section for that. The Rudai lease, we usually come to you this time of year and ask you about renewing the Rudai lease, but based on the conditions this year, Ute Water does not feel that they are able to renew it. Oh, Linda's gonna, no.
I just received, Linda Bassey with Stream and Lake Protection Section. I just received an email this morning right before this agenda item from the Ute District inquiring whether we were interested in renewing for up to 6,000 acre feet. So we're going to talk with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we may be coming to you in July asking you to approve implementing that lease this year in the late summer. Late breaking news.
More good news for once. Okay. In a really dismal year. So great news. Thank you, Linda. And then finally, the non-native fish tournaments. Non-native fish removal has been a really contentious issue for both programs for different reasons. In the Upper Colorado River program, they have, during the drought years, there was a huge explosion of smallmouth bass, particularly in the Yampa River, but all throughout the system where they had been. Turns out low warm flows are really, really good for bass and not as good for the native fish. And so we really started to have a problem. And some of the other states had some ideas about what Colorado Parks and Wildlife should and shouldn't be doing to contain that. That didn't meet the ideas that the local anglers had about what Colorado Parks and Wildlife should be doing about that. And so there were a lot of discussions. Some of the other states have implemented muskill regulations for all of the invasive species that they consider problematic. So smallmouth bass, northern pike, walleye, burbot, those types of things. In Colorado, statutorily, that was very, very difficult for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Telling people they must kill something was at odds with their waste of game regulations. And they didn't see a clear path forward in terms of cleaning that up, but they also had some concerns about their ability to actually implement and enforce a must kill regulation. And so they were looking for different ways to do things. And one of the ideas they came up with that has been much more popular than I think some of the skeptics thought it would be, have been these tournaments. And so in Ridgway, we were dealing with an illegally introduced population that by the time they caught it, it's pretty hard to get rid of. Ridgway's pretty deep, and it was kind of difficult to just go in and mechanically remove them all. But they came up with these tournaments with prizes for removing smallmouth bass. And so you participate in the tournament, you have to give up or keep everything that you catch. And so the little ones you don't get to throw back and catch later when they're bigger and more fun. You have to get rid of all of them. And they tried a couple different things at Ridgeway in terms of trying to figure out, was it better to run the tournament when it was easiest to catch them so that people had a lot of fun catching them? Or was it better to do it at the time of year when they were spawning so that you could remove all of those eggs that would have been laid by the ones that you caught? So, and as it turns out, I think by the third year, they figured out they were getting better luck doing it when it was easiest to catch them. And every year this tournament gets more popular. They get more and more anglers. And this year they removed almost 2,400 smallmouth bass, which they estimate was 53% of the bass over 150 millimeters. And that was a huge achievement, because if they can get those kind of catch rates, then they can kind of contain, they can't eliminate all the bass, but they can really contain that population if they continue to have that kind of success. And so the program, which originally some of the participants of the program weren't sure this was the best method, are slowly becoming much bigger fans of this as as CPW has more and more success. So that's a bright spot. Elkhead, it's the second year of the tournaments at Elkhead. Elkhead had some other controversial issues because Elkhead had already been stocked for a sports fishery with smallmouth bass and pike because they're very popular. And so as CPW wanted to move to other sports fish that are a little more compatible with the endangered species, the local anglers didn't want to lose this beautiful sports fishery that they had. Not all of them are convinced that they're escaping for the reservoirs up there that they have been stocked in. Some believe it, some don't. But CPW has had to work a lot harder at Elkhead. But in their second year of the tournament up there, they had a lot more anglers. They had 332 anglers, removed 963 smallmouth bass and 365 northern pike. And they're also implementing a lake management plan at Elkhead to slowly replace that sports fishery of smallmouth bass and northern pike with largemouth bass and some other sports fish. Director Broscheid can probably remind me better than I can which sports fish those are, because they've talked about several, some sterile or some that just aren't as competitive or don't eat as many, aren't as predatory. So they had several options. They've met many times with the locals up there, and they're going to keep stocking those other fish as they remove these. And so the idea is that between the net and the changes in stocking up there, eventually the program will feel like Elkhead is less of a threat to the endangered species than it is now. So quickly we'll talk about some of these other things that are going on that are different than business as usual, just so you know what's been going on with the program. The program, it's time for them to do their 5-year review and species status updates for all the species. Some good news coming in the next slide on that. The program funding reauthorization. So their funding expires in 2019. So they're working on fixing that. Some planning for post-2023 when the programs are no longer authorized. And we're currently working on the White River Management Plan and Programmatic Biological Opinion. The White River will be the last river in Colorado and Western Colorado to go through this process and get a Programmatic Biological Opinion to clearly cover those depletions and continued work on non-native fish management. So those are the big ones. Species status updates. So the Fish and Wildlife Service is reviewing kind of the current state of all the populations and everything that's going on in the river and what that might mean. So they do a 5-year review and they do a species status assessment, which looks at a bunch of different scenarios and the viability of the long-term stability of those populations based on all those different scenarios. And the great news that we got this spring was that they completed their review for the humpback chub, and their species status assessment led them to believe it was time to propose downlisting on the humpback chub populations. So excellent news. After many, many, many years of this program, we're going to have our first proposal to downlist one of the species. So that is an excellent piece of news for all of us. That means they will go from endangered to threatened. So a lot of the actions and the recovery program itself won't change a whole lot, but it speaks to a couple of things. One, that we can look to this as progress, but two, it speaks also to Fish and Wildlife Service having evolved in the way they look at ESA and the way they look at populations. Some of the original goals kind of showed perpetually increasing populations, which isn't how any wild population works. They go up and they go down. And so they took a different look at it this time in terms of stability, and they don't have to always be increasing if they look pretty stable. So over a long period, they may go up and down, but they're not in drastic decline. They're hanging in those kind of sizes that you would like to see. They now consider that threatened and not endangered because they are not at imminent risk of being extirpated. So they feel like threatened is a more appropriate designation, and we agree. Razorback sucker will be the next one. They are working on the 5-year review now and the SSA now. They're hoping to complete both of those in 2018. We hope that that one will also result in a proposal to downlist to threatened. Razorbacks were not that common many years ago when the program started. The stocking program has been very successful for razorback sucker, and they are seeing a lot of spawning of the stocked fish. And so we think this one's on its way to downlisting too. Colorado pike minnow, same story. They'll complete it in 2018. Whether or not they feel like downlisting is appropriate will depend, because the pike minnow have struggled more with the non-native fish explosion. That is a lot harder on the native predator. So Colorado pike minnow may or may not get proposed for downlisting this time. And bony tail, we've never had a lot of bony tail, and we still don't. So bony tail isn't going to change anytime soon. Reauthorization. The programs were authorized through 2023. Their annual federal funding, which comes mostly from hydropower revenues from Lake Powell, was on a shorter schedule. So every few years you have to go back and get new authorization to spend federal money. And so the most recent reauthorization was through 2019. So people were on the ground working hard on making sure that this gets fixed by 2019 so they can continue to use those power revenues to fund the annual costs of those programs. We got tremendous support from all of the Western states that are involved in the program. All of their legislators, bipartisan, supported these. And so we got identical bills introduced in the U.S. House and Senate in 2017. And Colorado's representatives were a big part of that. In one case, they were a sponsor, in another, they were in support, but they played a huge part in getting those bills out. In the House, H.R. 4465 passed in March of this year, which is great news. The Senate bill, we kept hearing when we were back in D.C. giving the update on where the program is, that they expected the Senate to pass it too, but a little different. It's not going to go through on its own. It's going to be combined with several other things. And we were being told that that was going to take a little more time. And the biggest problem in the Senate was trying to get a hearing scheduled and trying to get people to agree to when and where this would be scheduled. And it still is not, to the best of my knowledge. So we are still waiting on to see what passes the Senate and when. And then a little glitch that we were told will be fixed, because this goes in the president's budget but doesn't go in the final budget, is that while we were back there, OMB proposed taking all of those power revenues from WAPA and returning them to the Treasury, instead of funding the recovery program and the salinity control program and several other things that the Basin Fund pays for. OMB was going to return that all to the Treasury. So we were told by everybody in the House and Senate for all of the Western states that they will fix that, but it hasn't happened yet. So right now, Reclamation's budget for 2019 doesn't include that money, but we're told it will. So that's a concern we need to watch, but we've been told it'll be fixed. And the other big effort that's new and different is that we've got to start planning for post-2023, when the recovery programs themselves will no longer be authorized. But we know that these activities are going to continue. This is Redlands diversion. Millions of dollars were spent to construct that, and it needs to be operated and maintained, whether there's an official program or not, as do a lot of other activities. And so Reclamation has to submit a report to Congress by 2021 to talk about the state of the program, the state of the species, and what's going to happen going forward. So we're just starting in earnest to discuss all of this. Can the current program participants agree on, after 2023, what will be the purpose? What will be the structure of the group? Will it look the same? Will it look different? What activities do we think need to continue past 2023? Are there activities we think are more important or less important than now? What's going to be the cost, and where on earth are we going to get the money? So, and then for the White River Management Plan, that's currently underway. So we're currently working on modeling the current uses and possible future depletions that will be covered by that PBO. And we're also talking about the flow targets. This is the only one where they hadn't established flow recommendations and accepted them prior to talking about what the depletions are and could be. So we're trying to do those together, which is a little different, but we'll get there. After these things are done, they will move to the management plan that talks about what activities will be undertaken in that basin to help provide benefits to the fish to offset any negative impacts of those depletions that will be covered. After that, they will write an environmental assessment, and then based on that management plan and environmental assessment, they will write the programmatic biological opinion. This is a picture of Kinney Reservoir. As some of you know, Kinney Reservoir is silting full. They are looking at other options for some other water supply out there, including a possible off-channel reservoir that is being added in some capacity to some of the models of possible future depletions. When we started this, I think we all thought years ago when we talked about doing a White River plan, oh, there's not a lot of storage up there. It's pretty much a free system, so you get what you get. So the flow targets can be whatever they are, but no one's going to manage for any flow targets because there's not much storage up there. That could change, and what that would mean is under discussion as part of this. So, so Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District has been a very active participant, and once we get these two first pieces done, it's time to take it out to the larger group, the round tables, and some other folks to have more robust discussions about where that basin wants this process to go. And then non-native fish management, we've already touched on. CPW and the Fish and Wildlife Service will continue the mechanical removal and some chemical treatments of certain areas. But and the screens that we've talked about before, the fishing tournaments will continue. CPW also removed bag limits on some of those fish so that if you do want to catch them and take them home, yeah, there's no limit. Catch as many as you want. They're now looking at some interesting ideas on opportunities to disadvantage non-natives as you're filling a reservoir or as spring peaks come off, particularly in the systems like the green where they're already making releases for those spring peaks. Can you do it at a time that does something to get rid of the non-natives? Can you wash all the smallmouth bass if you time it right? I don't know where that will go, but they are looking at other things they can do besides just mechanical removal, because there's kind of a maximum amount of mechanical removal you can do. And what else can you do to make a dent in these? And in the San Juan, they don't have the smallmouth bass and the northern pike. They have catfish, which are harder to catch and perhaps a lot less detrimental. And so their discussions and the controversy down there is not how on earth do we do something about these exploding populations. It's we spend a lot of money removing catfish and we know it works, but catfish are hard to catch. So it's really a lot of time and money. And if it isn't really helping the native fish. Should we be spending our money on something else like creating more backwaters in the system? So two different controversies, but it's a huge issue for the programs right now. And I will stop. Any questions?
Questions for Michelle? All right. Yeah, one question. Director Dutt.
Michelle, what's the lifespan of that fish net at Elk Head?
They don't know. CPW had put a net on another reservoir up there that only lasted, I think, 7 to 10 years, but the net at Elk Head is different. It was installed differently. It's a slightly different material. So they're hoping 10 years or more. And we helped pay for the net itself and the installation. CPW has taken on the cost of cleaning and maintaining that net. And they're hoping more than 10 years, but not forever. And then the question is, will we still need to put in another net in 10 years, or will that population not be considered that much of a threat by then? And we don't know the answer to that.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, so we'll press on here before lunch. We have several people that are here for the WSRF requests. So Greg, close.
Craig and Greg today. I'm going to start and then hand things off to Greg. Greg Johnson, CWCB staff. We will be as concise as possible. Hopefully you noticed a new item in your agenda today for the WSRF program, the Water Supply Reserve Fund. We need a decision from the board on disbursement of the funds. Things have been extremely complicated this year because of issues with severance tax, as you well know, as Kirk Russell had updated you yesterday. So long story short, this was somewhat anticipated, of course. So the projects bill last year included $10 million from the loan program to essentially backfill funding that we did not anticipate receiving from severance tax for the Water Supply Reserve Fund. We did actually receive about $1.5 million from severance tax July 1, so the first installment, and then consequently did not receive anything else the remainder of the year of this current fiscal year. There was also discussion during the legislative session about what they were calling a potential clawback. And that terminology was not used in the bill, but the bill did pass. There was House Bill 18-1338 that did pass for the severance tax issues to have the refund to really make Tier 1 whole. There were some critical shortfalls to Tier 1 programs for severance tax that included a refund of the money that had already been dispersed to some of the Tier 2 programs, including the Water Supply Reserve Fund. Because all of that was going on, we did not disperse officially the last installment of the WSRF funds from the projects bill, from the loan program monies to the account that would have been April 1st. So if you remember, the way the program works, it's 3 installments. July 1 is 40%, January 1 is 30%, and the final 30% is supposed to come April 1. So that final 30% or $3 million was never dispersed for that reason because of all this ambiguity. So for the sake of the roundtables, we need some clarity. We just need a decision from the board. Staff recommendation is to disperse that $3 million July 1, so start of the next fiscal year, which would immediately be affected by that refund. So by the about $1.5 million. So it would be essentially $1.5 million going to the accounts July 1, and then hold off on there's $2 million from this current fiscal year's projects bill, the new projects bill. Includes $2 million, again, anticipating that we were having issues with severance tax that go back to the WSRF program. So staff recommendation would be to actually hold that and have $1 million hit the account January 1, and then the final 50% of that, the final $1 million hit April 1. And so by following that schedule, there's a table in the board memo. By following that disbursement schedule, it actually gets us very, very close to our cycle of the 40, 30, 30% that we typically have. So July 1, January 1, April 1, with the funding that we have available. So we just need some clarity for the roundtables and wanted to put that in front of you.
All right. Thank you, Greg. We have a staff recommendation before us. What is the board's pleasure? Or any questions for Greg first? Director Gallagher.
I've reviewed this and it sounds like a good way to proceed in order to cover particularly the current applications. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. So everything from today is based on balances that are already in the accounts. Yeah.
Been moved by Director Gallagher, second by Director Anderson to approve staff recommendation on agenda item 29. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thanks, Greg. Now we have Craig.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, once again, and members of the board. Craig Gabu, CWCB staff. This is agenda item 29A. It is an action item and is a grant request recommended for approval by the Gunnison Basin Roundtable. The applicant and grantee is the K Land Company for the project titled K Meyer Reservoir Dam Riprap. The purpose of this application is to assist the K Land Company to place approximately 5,640 square feet of new riprap on the face of the existing dam to eliminate erosion. Fill material will be placed on the crest of the dam and graded to a uniform elevation per the dam inspection report. The project objectives are stop wave erosion on the face of the dam, return the crest of the dam to optimal configuration, obtain an unconditional full storage rating from the Colorado Department of Water Resources, and guard the water rights of the reservoir. The applicant is providing a cash match of $5,500 and all matching requirements have been satisfied. No additional needs or issues have been identified. If approved, I will be CWCB's project manager. The applicant requests $5,000 from the Gunnison Basin account and staff recommends approval. Paul Kmeyer and his father Norman of the K Land Company are in attendance today. We are all available to take questions or address any concerns you may have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Craig, any questions for Craig? Paul, would you like to address the board if you're here? Welcome. Thanks for coming. Just state your name and who you're with.
Good morning. I'm Paul Kmeyer with K-Land Company. I'm the vice president of the company and also the irrigator in the outfit. So, and right after World War II, my father, who's with us today, and my uncles and my grandfather spent the summer raising the dam at our reservoir. And by fall, they'd kind of run out of energy and time. And my dad had to leave for a wedding, which turned out to be his own wedding. So, so they didn't get all the riprapping done. And in our most recent review by the Division of Water Resources, the dam inspector advised that we complete the riprapping on the reservoir in order to receive a clean bill of health. And so we would like to do that. Actually, this fall, it's going to be a good year to have a dry reservoir. And so we're applying for the funds to help do that.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for Paul? All right. Director Anderson.
Make a motion that we approve the board's recommendation for this grant.
And moved by Director Anderson, second by Director Gallagher, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 29A. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is agenda item 29B. It is an action item and a grant request recommended for approval by the Gunnison Basin Roundtable. The applicant and grantee is the Lake Fork Valley Conservancy District for the project titled Nellie Creek Toilet Retrofit. The purpose of this application is to assist the Lake Fork Valley Conservancy District retrofit an existing restroom at the Nellie Creek Trailhead, which is a very popular trail and attracts a high number of hikers. The U.S. Forest Service closed this restroom several years ago to a failure to compost and the inability to properly dispose of human waste. Subsequently, the water collection vault has ruptured, leaking human waste into Nellie Creek. The existing waste collection vault and human waste will be removed, the site cleaned up, and a new restroom installed. The applicant and third parties are providing a cash and in-kind match of $25,150, and all matching requirements have been satisfied. Since preparing this board packet, I've received several letters verifying the matching commitments. I have one left, so I'll be sure I get that in the official record before we put this grant under contract. Otherwise, no additional needs or issues have been identified. If approved, I will be CWCB's project manager. The applicant requests $11,000 from the Gunnison Basin account, and staff recommends approval. Camille Richard, the executive director of the Lake Fork Valley Conservancy District, was on her way, but she had car trouble, so she is not in attendance today. However, Ashley Holm of the U.S. Forest Service, she'll be, I believe, the Forest Service project manager, and she helped prepare the application. She is in attendance today, and we're both available to take questions or address any concerns you may have. Thank you.
Any questions for Craig? Ashley, would you like to address the board? Welcome. Just state your name and who you're with.
Ashley Holm with the U.S. Forest Service, forest hydrologist. Just here to answer questions if anyone had any questions. It's a really beautiful location, so maybe you can all get up there to hike on Compadre Peak sometime. So I'm told it's one of the easiest 14ers. So if you're looking for one of the easy ones, Nelly Creek, and hopefully there'll be a working toilet. Right?
Any questions for Ashley? All right. Thank you, Ashley. Director Anderson.
I make a motion that we approve this agenda item. Just as a side note, this is Colorado at its best, a high alpine country that's very beautiful, and this needs to be cleaned up.
Been moved by Director Anderson, seconded by Director Dutton, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 29B. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is agenda item 29C. It is an action item and a grant request recommended for approval by the North Platte Basin Roundtable. The applicant and grantee is the Jackson County Water Conservancy District for the project titled North Platte Basin Airborne Cloud Seeding Project. The purpose of this application is to assist the Jackson County Water Conservancy District to provide operational monies for a cooperative airborne cloud seeding project that is an extension into the North Platte Basin by the Wyoming Water Development Office Cloud Seeding Project in the Sierra Madre Medicine Bow Mountains of southern Wyoming. This cloud seeding program is planned for a period of 3 years. However, depending upon weather conditions and the number of flights, could be extended for an additional period of time. Aerial seeding will occur upwind of the target watershed along a path perpendicular to the wind directions at distances related to the storm wind velocities and ice crystal growth times. Cloud seeding would be temporarily suspended or curtailed when snowpack water equivalently thresholds are exceeded, during emergencies in the target area, and when high avalanche hazards levels warrant suspension. The additional snowpack is good for Colorado, but thresholds are set on snow water equivalents to ensure the snowpack in a watershed stays within the realm of natural variability for the local climate. No additional issues or needs have been identified. The applicant and CWCB's weather modification program are providing a cash and in-kind match of $119,500, and all matching requirements have been satisfied. If approved, Joe Busto will be CWCB's project manager. The applicant requests $150,000 from the North Platte Basin account, and staff recommends approval. Ty Wattenberg, a person you folks might know, is in attendance. He's on the board of the Jackson Water Conservancy District, and we're both available to take questions or address any concerns you may have. Thank you.
Questions for Craig?
I think time.
Mr. Wattenberg, would you like to address the board? Please state your name and who you're with, since nobody knows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ty Wattenberg, I'm with the Jackson County Water Conservancy District. Nice to see all of you here today. Before I start, I got a little bit of a couple of things I'd like to do first. One of them is Director or Mr. Chairman, I did appreciate you talking about the FBI this morning. I'm glad you took a tour over there. Just for some of you other folks, about 90 days ago, I got a questionnaire from a couple FBI agents about the character of Mr. Chairman, but don't worry, don't worry, everything was fine. It's fine.
I passed the background check to get in there, so.
Well, it may
and they
be
let me go.
It may be a little more than that, but anyway, I would like to thank the board for their consideration of our WSRA application. We're really excited about this. Also, I'd like to thank Joe, Craig, and Karen, staff members, for all your help, and also the Wyoming Water Development Office, their staffing, Julie, Barry, and Harry. This is another step, but we're getting closer every day, so it's a pretty big deal for us, and we're really excited about it. So with that, I'll close, and if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them, but thank you. We appreciate it.
Any questions for Ty? No?
Great. Thank you.
All right. So we have staff recommendation.
I make a motion to approve staff recommendation.
Been moved by Director Trick, seconded by Director Gallagher, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 29C. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Megan will now present agenda items 29D through G.
Welcome, Megan.
Megan Holcomb, Colorado Water Conservation Board staff. I am standing between everyone and lunch, so we're going to move fast. First, agenda item 25D. First, I'll note that there's a correction on the agenda that the applicant should be listed as Terrace Irrigation Company, not Reservoir Company. In the title, the project is correct. So agenda item 25D is a request for $15,000 from the Rio Grande Basin account to help the applicant Terrace Irrigation Company hire an engineering firm to perform an inspection of the existing outlet works pipe in the dam at Terrace Reservoir. This reservoir is on the main stem of Alamosa. On October 23rd, 2017, the state engineer inspection report described heavy corrosion observed in the existing 48-inch diameter steel pipe, which has substantially deteriorated since it was installed in 1979. The project team will prepare a report describing concept alternatives to mitigate the corrosion. Observations of the outwork pipe will be documented in up to 3 concept alternatives, including construction costs to repair the pipe corrosion will be provided. This is phase 1 of the project and will help form a basis for planning and future work. No additional needs have been identified and staff recommends approval. Terrace Irrigation Board members Virginia Christensen and Kent Reinhardt are here today, available for any questions.
Questions for Megan? All right. Virginia or Kent, would you like to address the board?
They said just if there are questions.
Okay. Do you have any questions for Virginia or Kent? Thank you for making the trip over here. We appreciate it. So. Oh, Director Dutton.
I would move approval of staff recommendation for item 29D.
Been moved by Director Dutton, second by Director Goebel, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 29D. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Megan?
Agenda item 29E is a request for $30,000 from the Colorado Basin account to help the Eller family make repairs to Antelope Reservoir. Located about 12 miles north of Kremling, the reservoir stores approximately 350 acre-feet and is located on public land with water rights belonging to the applicant. The Eller family operates a cattle and haying operation in Grand County, just north of Wolford Mountain Reservoir. Antelope Creek Reservoir is the main source for irrigation. 2014 state dam inspection found a number of items at the reservoir that required action. Follow-up video inspection of the outlet pipe found significant amount of rust requiring repair of the pipe. The scope of the project includes engineering and construction observation, repair of 165 feet of outlet piping, and replacement of the stem casing that operates the head gate valve, and also earthworks on the dam. No additional needs have been identified and staff recommends approval. The applicant was not able to make it here today, so I can take any questions before a vote.
Are there any questions for Megan? Director George.
I move that we adopt staff recommendation on agenda.
It's been moved by Director George, seconded by Director Dutton, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 29E. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Megan?
Agenda item 29F is a request for $100,000 from the Colorado Basin account to fund an agricultural water plan for Garfield County. The applicants, the 3 conservation districts of Book Cliff, Southside, and Mount Sopris, aim to study a number of important topics related to consumptive water use planning. The area of study will be on agricultural consumptive use water and may include other consumptive water users, including the towns and industries around Glenwood Springs, Newcastle, Silt, Rifle, Parachute, and DeBeck. The study will identify and inventory water quality and quantity problems and provide guidance to water users in the proper treatment of resources and infrastructure. The plan will include how funding, technical assistance, and other help can be obtained. One change of note from your water activity summary sheet is that Alex Funk, CWCB's new agricultural water resource specialist, will serve as the project manager for this grant. Otherwise, no additional needs have been identified and staff recommends approval. We do have 4 representatives for the project here today. That's Angela and Charles Ryden, representing Book Cliff and the Farm Bureau, and then Liz Chandler with Southside, Book Cliff, and Mount Sopris, as well as Peter Dodd with Southside, who would like to address the board.
All right. Would you state your name and who you're with?
Peter Dodd, Southside Conservation District. I'm also the secretary for the Colorado River Watershed Association, which is the group of conservation districts up and down the Colorado River. We're going to be doing a tour in October, so if I see you there, then I'll remember you probably. But we'd like to thank this board for considering our grant and approving it. So thank you very much.
Right. Any questions for Peter? Anybody else? Oh, Director Wells.
I had just one question. In the purpose of the plan, it says one of the purposes is to minimize potential for transfer of agricultural water rights to municipal uses. By that, do you mean the typical buy and dry transfer? Not so much alternatives?
We're trying to investigate that as well as what could be followed, identify potential users that could do that kind of stuff.
Okay. So I read it to mean minimize the potential for buy and dry types of, or maybe maximize the potential for alternative transfers.
We'd like to try to keep the water in the basin, in the Colorado River Basin.
I get that. Thank you.
Any other questions for Peter? Megan? Director George.
I don't see any more questions. I move that we adopt staff recommendation on agenda item 29F.
Been moved by Director George, second by Director Goebel, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 29F. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Megan.
All right, the final WSRF item is agenda item 29E, and a request for $37,500 from the Colorado Basin account.
NG.
G, sorry. Reading lots of things. Thank you. 29G. This request is to help the Roaring Fork Conservancy develop a water-based interactive map and information system for the Roaring Fork watershed. The effort builds upon the digital database and map generated in the Integrated Water Management Planning Framework. The interactive map will include information specific to the Roaring Fork watershed with the addition of data that provides background for the specific action items detailed in the Roaring Fork Watershed Plan Update. There are over 200 action items within this plan, and currently those action items are only uncovered and understood if one decides to read the 145-page plan and associated 250-item spreadsheet, which is accessed through a link on their website. The purpose of this project is to create a plan to house information about the Roaring Fork watershed that is easy to access and filter so that every user, from grade school students to seasoned scientists, can peruse research and recommended actions regarding a particular stretch of the river, subbasin, or watershed-wide. Staff will work cooperatively with the grantee to ensure enough funding is secured for project success prior to contracting. Otherwise, no additional needs have been identified and staff recommends approval. The applicant was not able to make it here today, but I'm available for questions.
Any questions for Megan? Director George.
If we're ready, I move that we adopt staff recommendation on agenda item 29G.
Been moved by Director George, second by Director Wells, that we approve staff recommendation on agenda item 29G. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we shall proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you very much, Megan. Thank you, Craig. Jayla Poppleton with Water Education Colorado has kindly moved herself to the afternoon. So thank you very much. So we're going to go ahead and break for lunch now, and we're going to take a little shorter lunch at 50 minutes. So at 1:10, if we could be back. So lunch is in the back, and come back at 1:10.